Willodeen by Katherine and Applegate. Part 1. The little creature appears late one afternoon on an old carousel in the village of Perchance. She propped, dazed, and damp as a newborn on a saddle of wooden unicorn. She blinks then blinks some more. She makes a noise and soft squeaky growl. Her breath comes and goes with tiny gasps and sighs. Her furry paws move when she tells them to. Her head turns this way and that. She seems to be in fine condition, but where is she? And more importantly, why is she? She pats her neck, the lifeless steed. Perhaps she should wait there. Yes, that might be the best thing to do, under the circumstances. She does not know herself well yet, but she seems to be a patient sort, and patience, he suspects, might serve her well, might even save her life. The creature was a maker, a boy, with nimble fingers and a tender heart. She spent hours weaving weeds and thistlestone in the milky moonlight, spinning her into existence. She has a friend as well, a girl with sharp eyes and stubborn soul. And though the girl is young, she understands things that others do not. The creature on her wooden horse knows none of this, not yet. She does know all at once, with great certainty, that she is quite alive and quite alone. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, when stones were soft and stars were bits of dust, I loved a monster, and it seems so forever ago, and perhaps it was. Though things weren't really so different, true. The magic was gentle then and plentiful, but it's always there, and you know where to look. The moon, after all, still smiles from time to time, and the world still spins like a dancer through the skies. In any case, the winds and wares don't much matter. The earth is old, and we are not, and what is all you must remember. Chapter 2. I suppose I always loved strange beasts. Even as a wee child, I had a drawn to them. The scarier, the smellier, the uglier, the better. Of course, it was kindly disposed towards all the earth's creatures, birds and bats, toads and clats, slimy and scaly, noble and humble. But I especially loved the unlovable ones, the ones folks called pests, vermin, monsters even. My favorites were called screechers. They screamed in the night, they demented roosters for no reason anyone would ever make out. They were grumpy as tired toddlers, they were sloppy and hungry hogs. And I guess there's no nice way to put it, they stank to high heaven. When one riled, and he'd slap a big tail and give off the stench as ferocious as an outhouse in August. And screechers were almost as always riled. That'll happen when people are constantly aiming arrows your way. Screechers had needle-sharp teeth and dreadful claws. They had wild green and yellow eyes, two critical tusks, and more drool than a dog at dinner. They weren't big, about the size of a baby bear, I'd guess you'd say. Their bristly fur was plum-colored, and their tails looked like their burnt flapjack covered in quills. I was the first to admit that screechers weren't exactly charming, but I had a soft spot in my heart for them nevertheless. I'm not sure why. Maybe I knew the thing or two about being unlovable myself. Maybe when the whole world was marching one way, some ornery part of me started shouting, "Go the other way, Willodeen! You've just got to root on the underdog, don't you?" And sure, it seems to me that screechers have always been the underdogs in nature's plan, although rooting for cute puppies would have been a whole lot easier. Anyway, that's how it was. If I'd like to take someone a whole lot smarter than me to tell you why we love what we love. Chapter 3. I saw my first screechers when I was 6. I was out hunting for sunberries with my pa, and I would have been at school, I suppose, but my ma and pa had long since figured out that I was happier on my own. I'd tried attending a few times, but I felt awkward and unsure about around other children, and they seemed to feel the same way about me. We didn't find a single berry. I had 'em reined in forever and a day, and the bushes were shrunk and crumbly and about to give up when Pa whispered, "Willodeen!" I followed his gaze, and here she was, my ma, screecher curled near falling a tree, along with a tangle of 5 squirming, complaining babies. Right off she noticed us. She whacked her tail in the dirt, hard as could be. Well, I knew she was coming next. Pa had warned me. The smell to describe, the part of 100 rotten eggs in your mind, then add some scoops of dead fish and a splash of skunk spray, you'll have the general sense of things. "Ain't her fault," Pa said, coughing and sniffling. "They rattle easy, poor creatures, and folks is always bothering 'em." "But why?" I asked as I wiped string and tears from my eyes. "Claim they eat livestock, kill pets, wild game, not with the truth of it. I see 'em eat dilly bugs and the like. Mostly they live on peacock snails, grubs, and worms." Pa rubbed his eyes. Of course, there's the matter of their odor. Some say they scare off tourists. He laughed. That much might be true at least. He stepped back from the nest, nice and easy, choking on the reek. Pa smiled in spite of it all. "She's just doing what she's meant to do, my girl," he told me. "Caring for her own, best as she can, like all us mas and pas. You have thought we'd leave then, sticking as we did?" But Pa pointed to a big rock nearby where he sat. Seeing we were far enough away from the ma screecher to calm herself. Pa loved creatures, same as me, which is why we had so many roaming the nooks and crannies of the cottage and yard, goats and tree hair, chickens and dibbly ducks, a peaching in an ancient river otter who just no longer swim. Our endless flow of cats and dogs and long since learned not to eat the other residents. See how gentle she is, Pa said as the screecher nestled with her brood. I hear 'em at night sometimes, I said. I wonder why they make a cartawol noise, all screechy and harsh. Nobody knows for sure, said Pa. Maybe they're like coyotes and wolves, just singing to the stars. Maybe, I considered the possibility. Too bad they can't carry a tune better. Pa smiled. Nature, Willodeen, knows more than we do, and we probably always will. The ma screecher nudged one of the babies with her snout. I wish people didn't hate them so, I said. They were here first. When you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Pa made a sad sighing sound, one he hardly ever made, but it startled me. If you're looking for folks to make sense, my girl, he said, you may find yourself looking for a very long time indeed. Chapter 4. After washing our clothes with boiling water and last soap, my ma finally admitted defeat and burned them in the hearth. Cursed creatures, she muttered at breakfast. What in blazes you two seeing them? Can't eat 'em, taste like the smell, useless as a critter as I've ever met. I glanced across the table and noticed Pa shared a smile. Nature knows more than we do, Ma. Pa winked, and she probably always will. My brother Toby, who was only 2.5, chose the moment to plop a bowl of porridge on his head. Hat, he announced. Ma gazed skyward and groaned. Give me strength. He said that a lot, and then she laughed, and she did that a lot too. She had a fine, wild laugh, my ma. I never went berry hunting with Pa again. Few weeks later, he was dead in the great September fire, along with my ma and little brother. Like so many others in the village, most of our animals died too. I survived, but just barely. And 2 neighbor women named Bertie and May took me in. By the time I was 10, a particular fire had forgotten by most, replaced by other dark days, mudslides, fevers, droughts, and more fires. It almost seemed the earth was mad at a lot of us. Nature knows more than we do, Pa had said, but some days that was just hard to believe. Chapter 5. I spent a long time in bed after the fire. I had some burns on my hands and the soles of my feet, but the real problem was the smoke that in my lungs. Taking deep breaths is hard to come by. While I recovered, May and Bertie gave me some reading lessons and a book about dragons. They learning came quick, and even my healing did not. We had a one-room school in the village, but it wasn't much to look at, and only a few children done it regularly. Most of us just worked if we were big enough or stayed out of the way if we're not. One day I was better, and May and Bertie pronounced me ready for wander free. That was just what I did. Mostly I wanted to be alone, felt safe in the hills, messy and clumsy. My elbows could always find the most breakable thing in the room, but walking in the woods, my body relaxed and moved easily, like an animal that belonged here. I liked keeping to myself. For as long as I could remember, people had always confounded me. I'd given it careful thought and decided most folks had started a sort of clock in their heads. It told them when the time to laugh a joke and step closer in the whispered confidence, when to start a conversation and when they say farewell. My head seemed to be missing that invisible clock, and I was always a bit late, or a bit early, never right on time. I was odd and wary, and that's just what the way of things. Like my gray eyes and untamed hair, red and tangled as a wild rose vine. I wasn't entirely alone, though. I had Duzu, my head hummingbird. He survived the same fire I had, though his wings were singed and singed, and he would never fly properly again. May and Bertie had found Duzu in the charred remains of a blue willow tree. They brought him in the cottage and nursed him back to health, same as me. I think they figured he'd bring me out of comfort during those breaks. Bleak, endless days of recovery. If you wanted to make an animal that's the opposite of a screecher, you might come close to a hummingbird. They're everything screechers are not. Duzu was small enough to fit in the pocket of my coat, with room to spare for a biscuit, what he would no doubt eat. His ears were round as coins, his fur reminded me of a dandelion fuzz, ready for wishing. A pair of shiny wings sprouted from his back, and he had big eyes, always full of questions. His black glossy tail turned on itself like a fiddlehead fern in the early spring, and his mouth, what seemed to be the rest of the permanent half-smile, hid a long, sticky tongue that slurped up insects in an eye blink. Mostly Duzu stayed in my pocket or perched on my shoulder. He could fly for a moment or two, but often he trailed behind me and sort of hop and run. At night, his delicate snores reminded me of a baby cricket, just learning to croon at the night. Duzu seemed content, although I worried about him being about the others for his own kind. One autumn, I even tried to introduce him to some other hummingbirds. I set him down near a blue willow full of hummingbird nests and walked away, hard as it was to do. Sadly, they wanted no part of him. They could fly, he could not, And because hummingbirds migrate over long distances each year, Duzu could never join them. He was like me that way, different, solitary, forever changed by fire. In any case, he seemed to have settled on my company. I hope I was enough. Chapter 6. The annual arrival of the hummingbirds was our village claim to fame. They migrated down from the north in huge flocks, confusing the skies and crowding the clouds before landing on the blue willows in our valley. They stayed until spring when they flew back to another home, an island hundreds of miles to the north. It was breathtaking seeing those animals clustered to the trees, their shimmering wings all fluttering, and they'd chosen perchance no one was sure. It seemed to have something to do with the gentle winter climate of our stands of blue willows, the only trees where they'd nest. Perchance they tucked in the valley around by the wooded hills like a baby in the green cradle. The river Essex ran through the town. Honey slow, our blue willows loved the river. They craved water, clutching the bank with their knotty-fingered roots, and the hummingbirds loved the willows. It was nothing of their sweet faces and lovely cooing that made the hummingbirds so irresistible as their nest made of glistening bubbles that absorbed sunlight and glowed all night. As if hundreds of miniature rainbows had gathered for a party, no one knew how the hummingbirds worked in their nesting wizardry. They chewed willowy leaves, somehow extracting the sap, and then blew tough walled bubbles. The bubbles adhered to each other in the branches of the willows. In surprising strength, most years the village had autumn fair to celebrate the arrival of the hummingbirds, and visitors came from near and far. When I was 7, we had to call it off after a mudslide north of the village center, and when I was 9, smoke from the fire 2 ridges over it had kept most of the visitors away. But even without those problems, we'd all noticed the fewer hummingbirds were migrating to the village. Each autumn, the willows still turned silvery blue, the air still got crisp apple feel to it, and we was still prepared for the onslaught of visitors. But something had changed. It had to be worrisome, to say the least. Perchance depended on money from some tourists. Inns brimmed to overflowing with customers who brought food, ale, and trinkets. A boy named Connor Burke made hummingbirds out of willow and bark, and sold them as souvenirs. May sold her thick knitted shawls. Nidwit Poole, the baker, created hummingbird-shaped pastries filled with berry jam. The rest of the year we made ends meet. We tended to our garden plots. Some of us worked in the lumber mill. We fished in the river and hunted in the forest. A handful of men had jobs building tracks on the steam railway that skirted the village. But the hummingbirds in the autumn fair, that's what had always kept us afloat through the lean months. Mostly I avoided the fair. Its teeming crowds had made me feel as if I was being smothered. So much noise, so much forced merrymaking. Often I would see children there, ones that recognized my rare visit to school. They moved in packs like wild dogs. After they passed, I would hear them howling with laughter. I wonder sometimes if it would be like to have a friend. To be comfortable with myself, I would be comfortable with someone else too. But I was happy enough. I didn't see the complications and confusion that might come with friendship. Usually I could stand only a few minutes at the fair before retreating to someplace quiet and safe. I loved seeing the hummingbirds, of course, but it was the screechers that mattered most to me and worried me more. While we were seeing fewer and fewer hummingbirds each fall, by the time I was nearly 11, the screechers had all but disappeared. I seemed to be the only one of the people who noticed, and I was quite sure I was the only one who cared. Chapter 7. While I was recovering from the fire, May and Bertie gave me a notebook, along with a sharp quill pen, a bottle of mirror petal ink, and several pencils. Each year after that, they gave me a fresh supply. Once I was better, I always kept a notebook and pencil with me as a waist pouch. On my walks, I took notes. Before the fire, I'd just point out interesting things to Pa as I noticed them. But all by myself, I felt the need to keep a permanent record of what I've observed. I guess I'd come to understand that the world could change in a heartbeat. I drew the till owls, asking for one only question: who? I kept track of where badger droppings and fresh fox dens. I sketched the buds peeking from the berry bushes. I counted the few blue willows in the hills. The more I watched and listened and stayed quiet and still, the more I understood the way of things. But mostly I learned about screechers. I discovered that they're lazy nest builders they were, taking over the abandoned homes to others whenever they could. I watched them eating dandy grass and green grubs. I had learned they had almost never made their strange screechy noise when the sun was out. And I counted. I've always had a gift for it, and like knowing how many things at first, it was hard to keep track, but eventually I began to know the screechers as individuals. I learned how to tell males from females. The males had wider snouts and broader chests. I recognized Kin, who I had my favorite screechers, and I gave them names. Kerwin had a mere stump of a tail. Budwig was missing a right paw. Antley was petite, with a stripe of white down her right side, but not her left. I got to know the families too, and their frolicking babes and grumpy grandparents, especially since some returned after a year. Screechers seemed to work hard at keeping their broods together. Older brothers and sisters often stood a lookout near dens, and parents never let their babies wander far. They had reason to be cautious. The village councilors had enacted a bounty on screechers after one ventured into a garbage pile during the autumn fair. A tourist happened upon them. The stench was bad for business, and that was that. Screechers were a nuisance, but nothing well-aimed arrow couldn't fix. 5 pieces of copper for a screecher pelt. That infuriated me. So who could blame a curious animal for nosing around town with the hope of his stomach? Season after season, year after year, I kept counting, and I started. There were 87 screechers, I'm pretty sure anyway. With that many, I was hard to keep them all straight. The next year, I counted 39 of them. By the autumn, I was about to turn 11. I feared we might be down to 1. Just one day after I looked, and day after day, I failed to find any more. Where is he? I murmured to Duzu one afternoon. He was perched on my shoulder while I peered into the empty nest. It had been occupied by a family of 4 screechers the year before. Duzu had made a cooing noise. He always responded when I spoke, and the 3 distinct conversational noises. Sometimes I was a throaty purr, sometimes it was a rising sound like a question, sometimes it was soft, musical sigh. It was quite sure we were having a conversation. We just had no idea what we were saying to each other. It was getting late. The sun was low, tired and flushed after a long day. The path was fur-shadowed, and here and there sunbeams cut through the limbs like golden swords. Near the top of the ridge I knelt, searching for the tracks in the dirt, and the crack and hard. There had been no rain for ages, it seemed, and I doubt I'd see anything much, but the screechers had sharp curved claws on each front foot, and sometimes those left marks. Nothing, though, I knew he'd been here yesterday. The only screecher I'd seen in 2 months. He was big and old, with a gray snout. I called him Sir Zert. He was old, so old, I figured he deserved a knighthood, simply for surviving. I sniffed the air. Was that smoke I smelled? Part of me had always been alert, waiting for the next fire, the next loss, especially at the time of year, when every day brought hot, dry winds. I inhaled again, no smoke, but maybe, just maybe, I smelled screecher. But when they were frightened, screechers still had an odor about them. A good smell, at least I thought so. Wild and earthy. Moved deeper into trees and caught a glimpse of something. There he was, curled up in a pile of debris branches, his snout covered by paw. A younger screecher would have noticed me approaching, but he probably couldn't hear or smell like he used to. He limped when he walked, like a May and Birdie. I suppose screechers got a rheumatism for some as people. I took a step closer. Sir Zoot opened one eye and glared. He grumbled to let me know I disturbed his nap. I lowered my head and looked away. After all my hours of watching, I learned that that's how you show I wasn't a threat. He relaxed a bit, half closing his eyes. I loved his eyebrow whiskers, bushy and silver white, and his lashes long and thick. Behind me, a branch snapped. I heard footsteps moving. Thwap! The arrow hit with such force that the nest seemed to explode. Chapter 8. My heart lurched. No, I screamed, but my voice got lost in the cities of Sir Zert and the lumbering steps of the approaching hunters. Run, I yelled, as if the old creature could understand me. I slipped Zuzu into my coat pocket. Hush, I said. Sir Zoot was gone, but I saw a thin trail of blood leading into the trees. Quickly, I covered it with leaves, so no need for hunters to realize they had hit their mark. Another arrow sped past, landing in the abandoned nest. Third arrow struck tree trunk near my head. I crouched low. Stop, I cried. He's gone, just stop. Through the branches, I make out 2 men carry bows with quivers of arrows stabbed to their backs. One man was short, dark-haired and stocky. The other was tall, with a thick gray beard and large belly. Foolish child, Greybeard grumbled. You just cost me a pocketful of coppers. Lucky we didn't hit you, said the companion. I picked up the arrow near my feet. Its tip was sharp and a screecher's tail's quill. The fletcher reminded me of raven feathers. Give that you, the Greybeard said. His partner yanked the arrow lodged in the tree trunk where the shaft broke. Please, they don't deserve to be killed, I said. The Greybeard plunged his nose. Smell that? He asked. Ain't nothing worse than that stink. I was so angry I could have noticed it. They do that when they're afraid, I said. They don't have arrows like you. Got sharp enough tusking bobs on them tails, said the shorter man. No need to stink up the world, too. Greybeard held out his hand. Let's have it, then, he said, jerking his chin at the arrow I was still clutching. My hands were trembling. I felt the tip, imagining the pain it would inflict. I handled many arrows, of course. My parents had taught me to hunt. I ate rabbit stew and chicken when I could, same as everyone else. But to kill something for no reason, just because, there was the sense in that. Hand it over, girl. I didn't look at him. I avoid meeting people's eyes. I just made my insides jittery. Besides, I learned I didn't always like what I saw there. Now, he snapped. But by then I was already running down the hill, trailed by screams of rage. Chapter 9. Nearly to the bottom of the hill, just out of sight of the village center, I glanced behind me. The hunter seemed to have given up. My heart shouted at me to slow down. My eyes stung. I smelled awful. And yet, it reminded me of the time I'd seen a Screecher family while berry hunting with my father, that day before everything had gone so wrong. With a grunt, I tossed the arrow as far as I could into the patch of thick brushes. Find that. Ow, said the bush. I stopped cold. A boy emerged. When he had an armful of reeds and grasses, one hand and the lantern in the other, I recognized him as Connor, the boy who sold hummingbird souvenirs in the tourists each autumn. He was a bit taller than me, with warm brown skin and a smile too large for his face. He squinted and then rubbed his nose. You've been with your friends? My friends? I frowned, because I didn't have any. Truth was, I never really had any. The Screechers? You followed me? Oh, of course not. It's just, I've heard talk that you study them, and I go up that way sometimes to get my materials from my puzzlers. Puzzlers? Connor shrugged. Things I make. I call them that because I'm never sure how I'm going to put all the pieces together. He cocked his head. Whose arrow is that? I looked at my feet. I did that a lot. I knew every least crest in my tired old shoes by heart. I think they killed him. An old Screecher. My voice was low. 2 hunters. For no reason. For most people, money is always the reason. I think he might have been at last. I haven't seen any other Screechers in ages. I made myself look at Connor. Have you? He shook his head. There was nothing more to say. I took a few steps toward the village and stopped. I needed to go back, to know for sure. I spun on my heel and started a slow trudge back up the hill. You're going back? Connor asked. I just want to know for sure. What if he's still alive and suffering? I'll go with you. I've got a lantern, and it'll be dark soon. I know these woods better than anyone. It was true. I knew the path by heart, knew all the perchance cobblestone by cobblestone and weed by weed. Connor set his grasses down on the side of the path. You've better luck tomorrow than when it's light. Tomorrow, I realized with a start, I'd be turning 11 tomorrow. I'd completely forgotten. Tomorrow is my birthday, I blurted. My cheeks burned. Why had I said that out loud? I began walking faster, but Connor rushed to join me. Here, you could borrow my lantern. Happy birthday. I looked up the ridge. The forest had changed into a collection of trees in the dark, formless mass. He was right about needing light. May and Birdie had been right, too. They had urged me to take the lantern, but I'd refused. Stubborn as the day is long, the Birdie, who had been a bit as stubborn as I was. Sometimes it's better to bend than break, said May. She'd been more inclined toward the gender persuasion, but not it worked on me. I didn't want Connor's lantern, and just mean having to return it to him later, and I certainly didn't want his company, but I did want light. Right on cue, Duzu poked his head out of my pocket and cooed. Hello there, said Connor. He held out his hand, and to my annoyance, Duzu chambered out of my pocket, up Connor's arm, and onto his shoulder. I love hummingbears, Connor said. They're amazing. This is one of the was hurt in the fire? I nodded, surprised he'd heard about Duzu, but in perchance people seem to know everything about everybody. Duzu cooed again. Fine, I said to Connor. You come. What about your grasses? You can come, but what about your grasses and reeds? They're not going anywhere. I walked as quickly as I could, eyes peeled for any sign of hunters, with Connor and Duzu at my side. The moon was caught behind the clouds, and the forest wore in the night in the dark, thick cloak. I had to admit, I was glad of the yellow glow of Connor's lantern. Near the top of the ridge, I paused into the angled trees. It wasn't hard to find them. I knew he was dead before I even got there. His eyes stared at nothing. His white snout was covered in blood. Duzu made his questioning noise, and Connor reached up to stroke him behind the ears. I gathered leaves and pine needles, covering the body as best I could, and wasn't for proper burial, but the dirt was too hard for much else. I knew the old Screecher would have died soon anyway. I also knew that before long other animals, sir bears maybe or wolves, would find his body and use what they could out of it. That was nature's way. He didn't talk, and as we headed back down, but in my head, a sad refrain repeated in each foottail. He was the last, the last, the last. Chapter 10. Near bottom of the hill, Connor gathered up his materials. I can walk you home if you like, he offered. No need. I sounded rude in my own ears, but so I added, thank you for going with me too, you know. Connor's dark eyes caught the lantern light. Have you ever heard of what call that night? A Screecher, I mean. Plenty, but not a long time. I've always wondered what they're trying to say. Me too. I'm starting to think that we'll never know. Well, said Connor. Good night, then. Wait. I held up my arm. Come on, Duzu. Duzu hesitated, then hopped over to my shoulder obediently. I guess he likes you, I said, somehow feeling a bit betrayed. Connor turned right. I headed toward the village center. The cottage was on the other side, near the river. Workers had erected a wooden platform in the autumn fair. The windows of the taverns glowed with flickering candlelight. but I didn't see many people inside. Already musicians, jugglers, and a handful of tourists made their way into the town. Still, things felt off. There's quite an unease about the place. Along the riverbank, torches burned in preparation of the fair, but I saw 2 hummingbirds. Usually by now the trees would be glimmering with a few early arrivals of the fresh nest. I made my way down to the river walk, the long path bordering the waterfront, trying to ignore the villagers who plunged their noses as they passed. Take a dip in the river. You're stinking up the place, an old woman grumbled. 3 girls about my age approached, arms linked. I knew them from a brief visit to school, and of course I'd seen them around the village, Violet, Poppy, and Primrose. I nicknamed them the Flower Friends. I never saw one without the other and 2 nearby. What's that I smell? Poppy asked, loud enough to be sure I heard. That's the Screecher girl, Primrose said as they walked past me. Normally I would have cowered, but I was mad, and anger made me louder. That's my new perfume, I yelled to the back. Do you like it? Their laughter reminded me of cawing crows. I didn't care about wit about those girls. They didn't matter. The last. Beside me, the blue willows stayed in the breeze. Their long leaves had already turned silver, and one side deep blue and the other, mesmerizing in their fall colors. But without the hummingbirds and their shimmering nests, the trees seemed lonely and unfinished. Near the edge of the village, I took a left. The cottage was close enough to see. I could bring myself to call it home, exactly. Seemed I could never use the word without thinking my old home. My mom, my pa, my brother are animals. They chipped teapot and the yellow flowers painted on the side. The wooden rocker where Pa sat and smoked a pipe by the fire. And they sagged my bed with its carving and a robin and its headboard. All gone, but a shard of moss teapot I found in the charred remains of my home, my old home. No matter, it was over, it was done. Pain was best packed away, covered up, the way I tried to recover Sir Zert. It was good. I was good, at burying things. The cottage was warmed and smelled of pea soup. May had dozing by the fire. Bertie was stirring a black pot. Well, look who decided to grace us with her company, she said. She wrinkled her nose. So you found one, I see. Or should I say, I smell. To shock, I began to cry. Hard, gasping sobs, the kind I hated, because I meant I'd lost control. Willodeen, she said, May, getting slowly to her feet. What's wrong, lamb? They killed him, he said. Sir Zert. I have no way to say any more. May and Bertie surrounded me in a tight embrace and let me sob away. And though I knew they weren't really my family, and I knew the cottage wasn't really my home, I could be held to listen to the fire crackle and the soup in the kettle gently simmer. Chapter 11. May and Bertie were impossibly old and crotchety. There wasn't any job they hadn't done during their long lives, it seemed, including working as healers. Their cottage was filled to the brim with potions and herbs, glass bottles and mortars and pestles. But their favorite work so far was been acting in a traveling theater troupe. A day never went by without one of them breaking into song, reciting a sonnet, and dancing a jig. It was the price I had to pay, Bertie said, for living with 2 former thespians. I owed them everything, and I knew it. They spent many sleepless nights tending to me after the fire, and they'd welcome me like it was kin. I did my best to show my gratitude. I weeded our garden, sold eggs from our coop, took odd jobs and I could find them. I did every chore and they asked me, and then some. Still, I tried hard to not let myself care of them too much. They made it easier than it might have been. They'd be surely as screechers. May was round and red-cheeked. Bertie was broomstick thin, taller than any woman I ever met, and even most men. They both had mounds of white hair, piled in flat puffs atop their head like melting snowballs. People called them witches, whispered about them. No husbands, no children, no strange birds. It made me want to protect them, but truth be told, May and Bertie didn't seem to need protecting. They've been together, they said, since before the dawn of time, and despite their occasional squabbles, it was clear that they could love each other dearly. After a hot supper of soup and crusty bread, I did my evening chores and headed straight to bed. My room was cramped. I had been a pantry before my arrival. It had been cozy, and I had a window, and that was all I needed. That night, the moon had hid beyond the clouds, and sleep hid from me. Duzu snored peacefully on my pillow. Everything about him was curled. He slept in a tight ball, his tail looped, wings hugging his round body. How did he sleep so soundly? After all these years, I still woke up dreaming of fires, of screams, and helpless. Sometimes I'd be the one screaming out loud, and Bertie May would come running in to soothe me. Duzu had been through the same fire I'd had. Why didn't they have bad dreams? Did animals remember things the same we did? Or did the world just exist from moment to moment for them? I closed my eyes. I saw Zerzert laying on the forest floor. I opened my eyes, ceiling clouds quilt. Eyes closed again, I saw 2 men grabbing my hands and pulling me through the broken window. I heard the fire growl in the living thing, heard myself yelling, Pa, Ma, Toby, till my throat knotted and I was unconscious. Eyes open, Duzu, my worn and dusty shoes, my notebooks. I lit my lanterns, reached for the notebook, and fumbled through its pages. Sometimes that calmed me. Over time, I learned the ways to trick myself into slumber. I glanced over the pages. It had been 2 months since I'd seen any screecher, but Sir Zert, I skimmed some more, and it had been 11 months since I heard the screecher call at night. It was almost a year ago, right after I turned 10. Tomorrow I'd be 11. Not that I felt there was much to celebrate. I knew there would be no gifts and that no coins to spare for such things. I closed my eyes and tried to recall my last birthday with my family. Mom and Pa had just finished building our home, and it made of logs and mud in time. Mostly. A simple dwelling, but they're proud of it. It'd been helped a bit, or at least my parents had pretended to let me help. All that work and sweat was building and dreaming, gone in a flash, in a frenzy of flames. That was the point of making things if they only came to ashes. All too often I only dripped off, only to wake from the nightmares about the fire that killed my family. It'd be bathed in sweat, screaming for help, gulping for air. It'd been so often I almost expected it. It wasn't so bad, really. May and Bertie always had been there to comfort me, and sometimes I even managed to fall back into an uneasy slumber. That night was different. Instead of flames and death, I dreamed about a screecher calling. I woke, startled and hoping for a moment, anyway. But no, the moon was still hiding, and the world was still quiet. Part 2. The creature takes in her new world. Things to touch, to smell, to taste. Breezes filled with possibilities. She glances behind her. A long, flat, busy part is attached to her rear. She extends her paws, sharp, curved things, appears. She startles. They're scary to see, but apparently they belong to her, too. She tries to stand on a wooden saddle of her quiet horse. She plops to the ground, but lands unhurt. Blink, blink. If she closes her eyes, the world goes away. If she opens them, they're all there again. Color and light and shadow. She takes a step. It's hard to move 4 feet at the same time. Maybe 2 and 2 will work. She walks back and forth, trying possibilities. Right front, left back, left front, right back. Oomph! She topples over to her snout. Couldn't someone be explaining the world to her? Shouldn't there be others nearby for warmth or comfort? She tries a tree with blue and silver leaves, long and twirly. She's drawn to it, though she doesn't know why. It means something good, something necessary. She waddles over to the knotty base of the tree and sits. She's already tired. Becoming is hard work, but she cannot close her eyes. The world is such a dangerous place. Somehow, she knows that much, at least. Chapter 12. May and Bertie were still snoring when I woke early the next morning. I dressed quick as I could. Mornings could be chilly now that autumn had arrived. Then threw on my coat. Lazy Doozoo, always last to awaken, still dozed. And the table sat a small round cake. Listening to one side of the squat candle in the center was kind of May and Bertie to remember my birthday when I almost forgotten it myself. The cake had taken time and thought and sugar, and we didn't have to leave to waste. I rushed outside and grabbed 3 logs from the wood pile near the porch. My breath made clouds. On the way back, I noticed something sitting in the old rocker near the door. I peered closer. It looked like one of the creations I'd seen Connor sell at the fair. What did he call them? His puzzlers? I dropped my logs. The sculpture was made of bits and pieces of nature. Bark and reeds, mud and leaves, twigs and stones, spiderwebs and glistening drops of sea sap seemed to be holding it all together. But it wasn't a hummingbird, no, it would be only one thing. And it was perfect in every detail, right down to the twisty tusk made of spiring reeds, the spiny flat tail that layered pine needle quills, green haynut silvers for eyes. It was a screecher. It looked right and left. Was Connor still nearby when he had left this? It was dusting in the frost on it, so perhaps he'd been waiting here for a while. I left the logs behind and carried the sculpture inside. Gently, I set the table, and then I pulled up a chair and stared. He had it all right, every last detail. How could he remember such a precision? And how did he create such beauty? For it was beautiful, even though it was a screecher. But why had he made it? I'd never seen such a kind person to make things. I lacked the patience, and, to be honest, the talent. I suppose there was some sense in creating practical things. The way May knitted shawls and fight under the winter chill. The way Ma had cooked meat pies for supper. The way Pa had made a hen house out of a discarded lumber. The way he had made a home together. A home that was no more. But this served no purpose, and yet it made me smile. I stroked the creature's nose. I might never see another screecher, but at least I have this. I felt wrong somehow, being pleased by a gift from a virtual stranger. I didn't like the feeling it made me beholden, needy. Connor didn't know me, not really. I ran my fingers over the bow tied around the beast's neck, over its frightening claws, its dangerous tail. I hadn't a clue why Connor had left this for me. I didn't understand my own feelings most days. I couldn't begin to figure out why other people did the things they did. Maybe it didn't matter. I wanted it. I needed it to be mine, and it was. Chapter 13. We decided to have cake for breakfast. May and Bertie were like that, not much for the usual polite rules of a home and hearth, which suited me fine. They were both delighted by the screecher Connor had made. May held it up to the light, examining it from every angle. I still can't get over the details on the thing, she marveled. Be sure to you say thank you when you see Connor next, Bertie reminded me. That's a great deal of work and kindness. I will, I said, although secretly I hope I wouldn't run into Connor anytime soon. I had a hard enough time just saying hello and goodbye to people. Make a wish, May instructed as she lit the candle. Duzu, who finally roused himself, half hopped, half flew onto the table, eyeing the cake hopefully. I looked at Bertie and May at their expectant, kind faces, lined by life. Thank you, I said, for making it. It's very nice. No, it isn't, said Bertie. It looks like a dying toadstool. She lifted her bony shoulders. What can I say? Barking bores me to tears. All that work, and before you know it, it is in one end and out the other. I'm sure it's wonderful, May patted my back. Go on now. I wish for something that's good for the soul. But what did I want? I tried not long for things. Even if you got what you wanted, it would just be snatched away in an instant. Out of nowhere, I thought of Sir Zert, lying in the blanket of leaves. The fresh tears came, bothersome eyes. I hated the way they spouted water so easily, betraying me at every turn. Oh, dear me, said May. The waterfall has returned. She dabbed at my cheeks with her handkerchief. I'm not sad exactly, I sniffed. I'm mad. These are mad tears. Somehow, that seemed more acceptable. Angry tears have magic in them, said Bertie. I rolled my eyes. She's right, said May. There's a great power with tears born of anger. May and Bertie were always saying things like that. I have half a mind to bottle those up, said Bertie, and she gave a brief smile. Bertie's smiles were often uncertain, more like fickle frowns. I would just grab an empty vial. Could you manage some more? Now, Bertie, don't be greedy. May dipped a finger into the icing of the cake and popped it in her mouth. Those tears belong to Willodeen, and she may need them. What's the point of being mad? I crossed my arms over my chest. No one cares what I think. I'm just an 11-year-old child. I had to catch myself before saying 10. You're an 11-year-old person, May corrected. Well, I'm not exactly a grown-up. Piffle, said May. I second her piffle, said Bertie. Grown-ups are just boring former children. May tried to scoop up another bit of icing, and Bertie went to her wanting look. And Bertie went, but grown-ups, I persisted, run the world. Well, we're not exactly doing a first-rate job of it, are we? Said May. Bertie squeezed my hand. Don't stop being angry, Willodeen. It's part of those who... you are. You see the world differently. You care. That's a gift. It sure doesn't feel like a gift. It was my turn to poke out the icing. Why is everything so complicated? Because we're humans, and humans are notoriously difficult, said May. She winked at Bertie, ourselves included. Bertie leveled a finger at me. Yes, Willodeen, even you. They were humoring me, I knew, trying to nudge me out of a bad mood. Now, my dear, said May, if you don't make a wish, I shall make one for you. My stomach is grumbling, and the candle's down to a nub. I couldn't think of a single wish, but May was clearly hungry. Closed my eyes, took a deep breath, just at one last annoying tear made it pass down my cheek. If only angry tears really did hold magic, I thought. I was close to a wish as I could come. I blew the candle and we began eating with Duzu's enthusiastic help. Chapter 14. We finished early, every last morsel of cake. Duzu was so full he promptly went back to sleep on my pillow, his belly swollen. I headed outside to feed the animals and gather eggs. To my stock, there was Connor, leading over the fence to pat Rufus, our black-bellied goat. My next puzzler is going to have goat eyes, he said. I love how strange they are, the pupils. Why are you here, I asked, and then I realized I must have sounded. Thank you for the gift. Could you tell what it was? I couldn't help laughing. Could I tell? It was perfect. You got every detail right. Connor seemed relieved. Oh, good. I was in a hurry and I made it last night. I wasn't sure about the tail. Last night, I repeated. You made that in one night? You said today was your birthday, and if I thought... He trailed off. It's really wonderful. I moved past him, grabbed the wicker basket, and leaned into the coop. The hens and dibby ducks collected annoyance as I gathered their smooth, warm eggs. Actually, I'm here because last night I remember the blue willow grove near the northwest ridge, Connor said. I emerged from the coop. Just a few trees hidden in the taller firs. Do you know it? No, I said, frowning. I thought I knew every inch of the hills around, perchance. Well, there was an abandoned den there. Fox, maybe. Didn't seem like it had been used in a while, but since it was near those willows, and sometimes I even see creatures digging around the roots, he paused. I thought maybe we could take a look. He would certainly check, but I didn't like the "we" part. Doubt there's anything there, I said. I spent months searching all around there. I glanced down a basket of eggs. The stripped dibby duck eggs were my favorite. Well then, I turned back towards the cottage. Thank you again. To my annoyance, instead of leaving, Connor followed me. I said a proper thank you. Shouldn't he go now? I was proved to accepting a gift, but just led to trouble. I opened the cottage door, and May was there sweeping. Well, she said, hello. She looked at me expectantly, so I said, May, this is Connor Burke. She made the screecher. The artist, she exclaimed. Oh, it's not art, really, Connor said with a shy smile. It's just a thing I like to do. Keeps my hands dizzy. And of course it's art. You created it, and you enjoy making it. Connor rubbed his chin. Well, yes, I guess I did. May sat aside her broom, brushed her hands with her skirt. Well, there you go. Then, Art, come on, come in. May ushered Connor inside and I followed reluctantly. Birdie, she called. It's the Screecher artist. I took my time placing the eggs I gathered into a large bowl. I didn't like having Connor in the cottage. It was my territory, even if it wasn't my true home in that way. It was like any smart wild animal. What else do you do when you're not making screechers? Asked Birdie, who was busy preparing a limited rub of the rheumatism. I like to write stories and poems about how then and sketch. A poet and an artist, Birdie exclaimed. The world could use more of you. Amen to that, said May. And I could use less of you, I thought. I made a loud throat-clearing noise. Well, Connor said, I suppose I should go. There's a village council meeting, and Father likes me to attend. He's one of them counselors. He says it's good practice. Good practice for what? Birdie asked as he ground rosemary leaves into a pestle. Connor shook his head. Becoming him, I suppose. He works over at the lumber mill. Ah, said May. And what's your plan as well? May, Birdie chided. You're doing it again. Pray, Messer, palm to her chest, finding offense. Moi? Moi? Doing what? Poking and prodding where you'd have no business. That's all right, Connor said with a good-natured wave of hand. I not really have a plan, not yet. There's not much of a future in making puzzlers and poems, I expect. In my experience, in our experience, May said, casting a fond glance at Birdie, it's best for all concerned if you simply go ahead and do what you're meant to be. Saves valuable time. I cleared my throat again. I was not person given subtly. Well, happy birthday, Willodeen, Connor said, turning toward the door. Thank you again, Connor, I said. Relieved to see him leaving, I managed what I hoped would be a grateful smile, but just then, Birdie slammed her palm on the table with such force that I jumped. Here's a thought, she cried, waving a pestle in the air. Why don't you attend the council meeting with Connor? I looked over my shoulder, but apparently she was talking to me. She might as well have said, why don't you borrow a pair of wings and fly? Me? I said, sending her a dark look. Of course you, Birdie said. Speak your mind. Tell them how you feel about the bounty on the screechers. Get it off your chest. She nodded and threw out her arms dramatically. Unburden! Proclaim! May added. I seeked the glance at Connor, who seemed to think he was a wonderful idea. My throat clenched at the very thought. I hated speaking in public. I barely spoke up to the safety of the cottage. I couldn't, I protested. Besides, nobody would listen to me. Probably not, Birdie admitted. At least not at first. I groaned. Then why bother? Because these things take time, said Birdie. May nodded. Lots of time. Change doesn't happen overnight, my dear. Well, if it's such a good idea to speak up, why don't you two ever go to the council meetings, I asked. May glanced at Birdie. She has a point, Bird. She does indeed, Birdie pursed her lips. I suppose we do not attend because we are old. And tired, May offered. Birdie nodded, and lazy. Don't forget cynical, added May. Also jaded. But you, Willodeen, you're none of these things. Birdie made a shooing motion with her hands. Off with you, then. No, the word patently exploded from my lips. I mean, I have work to do. The animals, and we need more wood, and you know there's no point in arguing with us, Birdie said. Best be on your way, Willodeen. We'll take care of things. I narrowed my eyes. When they started on me like this, I'd usually lost. But they had to know I'd never speak up at the meeting. I wondered if they were trying to get me to spend time with Connor and hope they'd make a friend at long last. Connor held open the door, as if we'd been planning an outing all along. Hurry now, Birdie snapped. You're letting in the chill. Be off, girl. Do something useful with all that anger. Before I knew it, I was standing in the porch with Connor. What? Wait, I said, panicking. I brushed back inside. I was rude to slam the door in someone's face. The disappointed looks in May and Birdie told the answer. I, forgot this, I said. By the way of an excuse, I grabbed the puzzler and wrapped it in a napkin. I decided to try one last time. It's my birthday, I said, angling in sympathy. It's not how I wanted to spend it. This is a perfect way to spend it, said May. Now scoot, be gone. Fine, I muttered. Remember, Birdie called, there's magic in your anger. I closed the door behind me loudly. Piffle, I muttered. Connor was standing by the front gate. Did you just say piffle? No, I lied. Figured you went back to get your doozu. He's asleep, I said. I wanted to get this. He held up the screecher in the napkin, wrapping, and he pleased look on Connor's face almost made me forget how little I wanted to be here. They probably need some drive some more, he said. If anything breaks, I can fix it, though. I'll be careful. I gently slipped it into my pocket, and off we went. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw May and Birdie through the window, looking far too pleased with themselves. Chapter 16. We walked through the center of town without saying a word. To my relief, things weren't as awkward as I expected. Still, I felt there was something more than I should be doing. Talking? Was that it? Should I remark on the weather, the decorations of the fair? Sometimes I felt like everyone in the village had to read the same book about friendship and toss it in the river before I could read it. In any case, it didn't matter. We simply walked the fresh air and the sharp edge it only felt in autumn, though we didn't see the single humming-bear when we passed the blue willows of the river's edge. It was Connor who broke the silence. Do you think that I do, making the puzzles, I mean, do you think it's odd? I suggested. Connor stretched the back of his head. Well, yes, that'll do, I suppose. Odd. Yes, I said. I didn't mean it unkindly. It was just simple truth. People are often so quick to avoid the honest answer to the question. A lot of people at school would say the same thing. He gave a short laugh. Of course, look at you. His voice is gently teasing. You're obsessed with this hideous beast in the land, after all. So? My pa taught me that. So was a fine response that almost any insult, and was remotely possible that I've been insulted. Bertie and May may be saying different as the usual thing. Connor had considered the idea. My father says being different makes life more difficult. I watched the leaves in the blue willows swirl, silver and blue, blue to silver. I guess both could be true, I said at last. The village hall was a squat building, nothing much to look at. It had been rebuilt after a fire consumed the original hall, the same fire that killed my family. At the front steps, Connor warned, prepare yourself. For what? Silly debates, endless bluster, arguments over nothing. Do you go all these meetings? Most of them. My father thinks it's a good way for me to learn about the world. Sometimes I nap when no one is looking, or sketch or write stories. Connor stared up the stairs. But I hesitated. I think I'll wait here, I said. To be honest, I really don't want to do this. Me neither. But I promise it's not so bad. Come on. He jerked his head toward the door. I could use the company. I took a step, another. One of my shoelaces was loose. I stopped to retie it. Connor waited. I don't much like crowds, I said to my shoe. My hands were still sweating, my face was hot. Who does? Connor laughed. Really, I promise there's nothing to be afraid of, Willodeen. Well, that set me off. Yes, I was afraid, but there was no way anyone else needed to know. I sprinted up the stairs and left Connor in my wake. Chapter 17. The interior was stuffy and crowded. High round windows provided circles of light. Most people sat on the benches, pipe smoke twirled, other voices rose and fell. I usually sit over there, Connor said, pointing in the bench near the right side. In the front of the room, seated at the long, low table, were 5 men and 1 woman. Connor waved, and the man had a curt nod. His father, no doubt. They had the same sharp-edged jaw and lanky build, but Mr. Burke had a stern look about him that made me want to lower my gaze. I recognized the woman at the table as Miss Rossett, the only teacher at our one-room school. She was short and sturdy, with straw-colored hair tied in a braid. This time of year there was no school, so as everyone had pitched in to help with the fair. Although, like many village children, I hadn't attended much longer. Bertie and May left such things up to me, and I had no desire to spend time indoors with others, and when I could be roaming the hills on my own, I doubted I was missing anything. As we settled, a gavel pounded, and the sound echoed in the rafters. The council meeting still at the Commons announced the chair, an older gentleman with a wild state of hair and an immense mustache. That Thaddeus Vilner, Gardner whispered as he pulled a journal and a sharp pencil from the coat pocket. My father says that he has a terrible breath. I tried to hide my smile. The agenda for today, said Thaddeus, is one thing only, and as all we know, our livelihoods are in jeopardy, and our winter may be bleak indeed, unless we determine what has happened to the hummingbirds we all love. This year's things appear to be worse than ever. He scanned the room. Has anyone seen a hummingbird migrate in yet? Miss Rossett held up her hand. A fortnight ago, I saw 2 hummingbirds. They were flying south. I watched them pass right over the riverfront willows and kept going. Thaddeus grimaced. Anyone else? The crowd was silent, but not for long, as Connor had promised. A great deal of talking followed, and not all without hummingbirds. The villagers' words poured out in such force I feared I might drown in them. I hadn't heard this much talk in the past 5 years combined. It made me dizzy and breathless. At one point I decided I needed some fresh air. I moved to stand, but Connor took my arm and pointed to a sketch he'd been working on. It was Duzu soaring through the clouds. It was a good likeness, though. It made me wistful, knowing Duzu would never fly like that again. Smiling, I sat back in our bench and tried to collect myself. I closed my eyes and took long breaths, and I listened. I began to hear not just the cascade of words, but the pain behind them. Every villager's statement held the same feeling, fear. Mostly they talk about the hummingbirds, and if the migration ceased altogether. How could people feed their children without the money from tourists? And there were no other worries, too. What if other fire came this year? The hot autumn winds and the ones we call dragon sighs were blowing with more force than in the years past. Garden harvests had been disappointing, too. How could we plant when we had no idea whether or not it was going to rain? I found myself counting the worries in the way I counted screechers. 7 villagers mentioned the lack of rain. 11 talked about fire. 22 wondered if there were hummingbirds were going. 6 talked about their dying crops. 4 mentioned how the mill upriver disrupted fishing. 2 worried about the railway cutting through the forest surrounded perchance. I felt a bit sorry for all the adults, how hard it must be to worry all the time without children and their future. I heard fear, impatience, and a great deal of frustration. The problem, it seemed to me, was the villagers couldn't decide where to direct their anger. Several blamed the councillors, although it wasn't exactly clear what they'd done wrong. Others said we'd angered the heavens. The few who blamed nature herself were letting us down. And one gruff gentleman carrying a walking stick blamed plain old bad luck. On that, at least, everyone seemed to agree. They agreed far less on what to do, waiting and hoping, and on one hand, or rage and curse, and on the other seemed to be two favorite approaches. But there was a great deal of squabbling, blaming, and back and forth, and grown-ups seemed to be quite good at. One of the last men to speak came from the back of the room, and I recognized his thick gray beard instantly. "Out well bored in here," he said. "You have the floor, Mr. Borden," said Thaddeus. "I got me an idea. Seems there's plenty of coin in the village coffers." "Actually," Mr. Burke interrupted, "that's not the case." But Outwell forged ahead. "There's money enough," he said. "Why not raise the bounty on pests? Give us something to spend, at least while we wait things out. A lot of us are down on our last coppers." A man near the front leapt up. "If there's money to be had, we should spend it on mending Main Street." "How about the repairs of the school?" someone else called. Others chimed in with more suggestions: a new roof to the village hall, food for families whose crops had failed, a fresh planting of blue willows to attract more hummingbirds. "Ahem," Owl said. "Pretty sure I'm the one who's going to talking at the moment." "Go ahead, Mr. Borman." "It was saying something about pests," said Miss Rosett. She had a skeptical gaze, but I appreciated. "Creatures are and the like. Rats and nice, too," he suggested. "How about the fair wages to clean up the village? It'd help out a few of us at any rate." And the word screechers, my pulse quickened. I felt the words forming, even though I tried to bottle them up. "I'd argue that screechers are the last of our problems," said Thaddeus. "Hardly any to speak of." "And whose fault is that?" someone cried, and it seemed I was that someone. Chapter 18. Some part of myself, watching the following moments unfold, was shocked. I could see the red face, my frazzled hair, my clenched fists. I could see the crowd, too, aghast in the interruption from a mere child. "You!" Outwell shouted. "You're the Screecher girl, the one who stole my arrow from me. I thought the place reeked. Should have known." Thaddeus held up his palm. "We will have this order in this meeting." But my words kept coming, gushing forth. "We don't have any screechers because of that stupid bounty," I yelled, "and they were harming no one. Why waste your money on killing animals who don't need killing?" "They're not here to discuss the lack of screechers," said Mrs. Burke in a calm voice. "We are here to discuss the lack of hummingbirds. We need them. We certainly do not need any more screechers." "Ain't nobody needs screechers," Outwell said, and the crowd snickered. "I'm just saying." Was I still standing? Was I still speaking? I glanced over the crowd and briefly considered fainting. So many faces, all staring at me. Connor's eyes were wide, and he made a nod of encouragement. "I'm just saying," I began again, and then faded. "You ought to be saying you plan on replacing that arrow you stole," Outwell muttered. "In light of this digression, perhaps I should remind us all," said Thaddeus, "that we are assembled here to discuss why hummingbirds are failing to return." Apparently I wasn't done. Maybe it's us," I said, surprised to learn I still had words left to speak. "That we're the ones who keep changing things," my father's voice whispered in my head. "Truth is, nature knows more than we do." "Sit down, young lady," said Thaddeus. "We have heard quite enough from you." That ordinary part of me, the one that always urging, "Go the other way, Willodeen," reared up, ready to fight. I felt a screecher sculpture in my pocket. Anger boiled in my chest. "These animals! Screechers! There's part of the things you and me." I took a steadying breath. "Look, I don't know why the hummingbirds are gone. I don't know why in the world it's changing so fast and so wrong. But I do know that nature's a complicating thing. It's like, I don't know, like knitting a sweater. You pull one string too hard and the whole thing starts unraveling. I'm not saying just not lose things before we get the chance of understanding them, screechers included." Silence, murmurs, laughter. It was time to leave. I walked toward the door, holding my head high, though I stumbled more than once. As I reached for the handle, I turned to see as Connor might be following me, but he was still seated, avoiding the stare and glare of his father. I slammed the door for the second time that day. This time I hoped it was rude. Chapter 20. I didn't dare move. I couldn't bear to frighten the trembling animal away. The familiar scent of a scared screecher wafted my way. I glanced left and right. The square was deserted, save for my lurk monk, who chitted in annoyance at the smell and ran for safety of the nearby ticket. Behind me, down toward the river, villagers were setting up stalls to sell their wares, and the fair ever hopeful. Before me sat a baby screecher. My coat was lying on the ground nearby. Here, I could see that the pocket was empty. I had always been a practical sort. I did not believe in magic and spells and things that defied logic. As it was, nature provided many of my mystery. I inched close to the baby screecher's eyes, huge in fear. It was roughly the same size as the puzzler Connor had given me. It was roughly the same place that I had left the puzzler, and the puzzler seemed to be gone, it was in a huge leap. A giant chasm of a leap. To think that one thing that turned into another. That was how nature worked. Baby screechers didn't suddenly appear out of the air. It was a female, I decided, based on her small snout and barrel chest. Clearly, she had wandered here from the woods. It was so bizarre coincidence that it all was. The screecher had made a squeaky noise, a warning to me, perhaps. It was all I could do but not laugh. I had seen baby screechers before, but the time with my pa a couple years back, I got a glimpse of a ma screecher with 4 newborns. I backed away on lightning quick, and I knew the last thing a ma needed right now was a human intruder. Even then, they were so young, I'd admit that screechers were odd-looking animals, and the one was no exception. Still, when she tried to take a step and troubled onto her tail, it was awfully charming. Her tusks weren't much to look at, and her tail bristles seemed more delicate and threatening. But I knew she was meant to grow into something fearsome. Where could she have come from? Where was any nest nearby? I would have seen them, or Connor would have. Perhaps the hunter had killed its ma. Maybe the baby had wandered down from the hills, somehow surviving. It's incredibly unlikely, but there had to be an explanation. Poor thing. I had another step, and she gave it what it was supposed to be a fierce growl, like a crabby kitten, and whacked her tail again. It didn't have much effect. The air smelled as bad as it's gonna get, given her size. I couldn't leave her here. She'd be dead by nightfall. I thought of Otwell Boren and shuddered. I knelt down and looked away and backed up and show I was in threat. The screecher seemed to calm a bit. Slowly, I kept moving away. The baby bustled herself, licking her tail. I circled around until I saw our side of the carousel, mostly hidden by the legs of the wooden animals, and the screecher's ears pricked up. One of them, in the notch it was, in it. Just like Connor's puzzler. I couldn't think about that now. She needed a bow tied around her neck. Just like Connor's puzzler. And couldn't think about that either. The baby could hear me moving as I reached to pull up my coat, blue unicorn, and she seemed to be distracted by the desire to make her 4 legs work together. I would only have one chance. Deep breath, I took a flying leap off the carousel, stretched my arms out, and strapped the baby screecher under my coat. If she'd been any bigger, her shrieks would have been deafening. Chapter 21. While she struggled and squeaked, I wrapped her up as best I could. I reminded myself that even though she was young, her tail quills might hurt me. I heard the quills of adult creatures caused a miserable sting and took forever to remove. I held her close to my chest. Shh, I said. Hush, little one, you'll be all right. I didn't want to squeeze too hard, didn't want to crush the terrified baby or prevent her from getting enough air, but I also wanted to keep her quiet enough for me to sneak through the village center and make my way back to May and Birdie's cottage. I could try to cut through the woods, but around here they were thick with briar bushes and a hard time getting through even without having the hold of a squirmy baby. On the other hand, once again, I bore a screecher perfume, which would make it difficult for me to pass unnoticed. Shush now, I whispered. We're gonna find a safe place for you. Even as I said the words, I realized I had no idea where it would be, but I thought I'd beat the baby. Would it be mother's milk? What if there was a nest hidden away somewhere with more babies, or an injured adult? Nothing I could do about it now. Something scratched my arm, and I realized the screecher's claws. They pierced right through my coat, not enough to mark, but still it made me realize how powerful adult claws must be. I began to walk, humming softly, and maybe the rhythmic movement or my off-key tune, but the baby seemed to relax. I stayed in the riverfront, where most of the activity was, and kept back path, but I passed several villagers, a few of them who recognized the council meeting. Look, an old man said. It's the screecher girl. She certainly smells the part, said the companion. I kept my gaze straight ahead, clutched my coat, and moved past fast as I could, ignoring the occasional taunts or eye rolls. As I approached the lane leading from the cottage, I glanced down the riverfront, and the blue willows spouted the brisk, warm wind. I saw no hummingbirds. I did, however, see Connor. He was hammering a wooden stall into place. A stack of hummingbird puzzlers sat nearby in a large willow basket. Quickly I averted my gaze, but not before he noticed me. Willodeen, he yelled. Wait! I'm in a hurry, I called over my shoulder. He grabbed the basket and ran to catch up with me, even as I increased my pace. Wait, he repeated. I want to explain. A moment later, Connor had joined me, moving in the tandem of my stride. He was breathless and face anxious. I should have spoken about the meeting, he said. Defended you. Why? I asked. It's not like it would have mattered. Because I agreed with you. But my father is... I knew he'd be embarrassed if I... Connor paused, sniffing the air. I could swear I could smell Screecher. I said, holding my coat tighter. I want to show him that what I found, but my confusion of Screecher's origins made me wary. Should I trust Connor? Would he tell his father? Already I felt strangely protective of the baby in the way I suppose a parent must feel about their child. Our road narrowed and grew steeper, and our pace slowed a bit. The baby let out a noise that sounded like a squirrel squeak. It was hard to ignore. Connor frowned. What was that? Just me, I coughed slowly. Might be catching. You best be on your way. But I stopped. Connor, it's all fine, really. There's no point of you speaking up at the council meeting, because there's no point in my speaking up. Nobody cares about screechers. It's the hummingbirds they're worried about, and I understand that I do, but The baby just poked his claws in my neck. I loosened my grip at just a tad and popped the little screecher head. Gossamer tusk and all. Apparently she was quite enough of my company. She wriggled 3, dropped to the ground and squealed, and took off running. It seems she figured out how to use those feet after all. Chapter 22. The baby scrambled up the road at surprising speed. "It's a screecher," Connor said. "We have to catch it," I yelled, already running. "Or they will!" I didn't have to tell Connor who they were. The screecher still had quite a grasp in the art of running. Her legs got tangled quickly. She dashed, tripped, and landed on the rear, or sometimes her snout, then dashed off some more. Back and forth across the street she darted in a random zigzag. Other than the cottage or two, thick woods ended up against both sides of the road. I kept waiting for the baby to disappear into the underbrush. Instinct would surge her there. I thought she seemed too overwhelmed to know what to do. It was a good thing for us. Connor bumped out his basket of hummingbird puzzlers, then bounded ahead in a flash. He was on the far side of the baby, planted solidly in the middle of the road, and his empty basket at the ready. The screecher caught sight of him. She paused, glanced behind her, and there I was, my coat held open. "She'll head into the trees," I called. "Try not to scare her." The Connors said I was stating the obvious. The screecher squeaked, circled, reared up on her hind leg, and toppled onto her side. Poor thing, she was so confused, so lost. I met Connor's eyes. He nodded, held up one finger, then two, and on three we ran for her. She bolted, heading right into toward the triangle of the sunberry bushes, but Connor and I were faster. Connor dropped the basket over her. Carefully, we slid my coat under it, overturned the basket, then upended it. Once again, she was trapped. Connor and I looked at each other, breath and dirty, sprawled on the road. "Good work," I said, brushing my hair out of my eyes. "Where did you find it?" Connor asked. "Down in the carousel. I left my coat behind and I went back, and she was just sitting there." Connor peeked under my coat. The baby attempted a winsome snarl. "Willodeen," he said. "Its neck." I rubbed the spot where the baby had poked me. "It's nothing. I'll get it cleaned in the back of the cottage." "It's not your neck. Its neck." He seemed frustrated. "You see what's around its neck?" I didn't answer. "The sweetgrass reed." I waited for more. "A sweetgrass reed tied in a bow." I looked at my shoes. The screecher I gave you had a sweetgrass reed tied with a bow around his neck. I swallowed. The baby screecher skittered back and forth in the basket. But did you put the bow on the baby?" "No," I said. "Maybe it got tangled in some reeds, or maybe someone did it as a pranker." I was out of ideas. "I suppose." Connor patted the pockets of my coat. "Where's the puzzle I gave you?" he asked. "I'm not exactly sure." Connor frowned. "You mean it's gone?" I hoped if I said the words quickly enough, they wouldn't sound so absurd. "I accidentally left my coat with the carousel, you know, the blue unicorn. Well, that's where I left it, and when I went back, the puzzler was gone, and there was the baby on the ground with the bow in the pocket and empty, and really, that's all I know." Counter stared at the basket, then he stared at me. I didn't want to say another thing I knew, that the baby screecher had notched at ear, that my own tears had made a similar nick on Connor's puzzler. I didn't want to say that because I couldn't let myself believe there was any connection. "We should go back," I said, pointing down the hill. "All your hummingbird puzzlers are there." "At the least of our problems," Connor said with a weary smile. The baby squeaked. She did not sound happy. "Let's go see May and Birdie," I suggested. "They'll know what to do." I wondered if Connor could hear the doubt in my voice. Chapter 23. May and Birdie did not seem particularly surprised when they found a basket containing a baby screecher arriving at the door. Strangely enough, the baby screecher didn't seem particularly surprised either. We placed the basket before the hearth. It was a warm cottage, but Birdie lit fire anyway. Even after I slid my coat off the top of the basket, the baby sat calmly, peering up at us with vigilant green eyes. Ribbed yellow, perhaps she had used all her energy trying to run away, or maybe she found a crackling fire calming. Zuzu seemed fascinated by our new addition. He hopped over to Connor, fluttered up his shoulder, and grazed down at the baby, cooing questions. Gently as I could, I slipped the sweetgrass reed over the screecher's head. He grumbled unconvincingly. Passed the bow to Connor. He examined it, slowly shaking his head. "Poor wee thing," said May. "Must be scared to death." Connor set the saucer of water in front of the baby. The screecher leapt it up eagerly. "So it was reason we have this visitor?" Birdie asked as she refilled the saucer. I hesitated, but only for a second. I knew there was going to be a share of a whole story with May and Birdie, but they're probably the only people in the world who could tell without being laughed at or locked away, or at least the baby would be safe here. I recounted what happened with some help from Connor, the screecher's appearance in the carousel by an empty coat pocket, the attempted escape, the reed tied around its neck. Connor held up the bow. "It has to be the same one," he murmured. He didn't look down from May and Birdie and back again. "Doesn't it?" May settled on the rocker near the basket. "What were you doing before he appeared, Willodeen?" He squinted at the baby. "Or is it a she?" "A she, I'm pretty sure," I said. "She'll be needing a name then," Birdie pointed out. May held up her hand. "First things first. Bird, what was going to happen before you found her, Willodeen?" "I went to the council meeting with Connor." She spoke up, too, said Connor. I was surprised to hear something in his voice that sounded like pride. Birdie clapped her hands together. "Brava!" she cried. "Did you unburden yourself, make your case?" "Oh, I am burdened, all right." I really didn't want to go into details. "And then I went outside, sat down, and Did you cry?" May asked. She actually looked hopeful. "I guess so. I mean, yes, I was mad." "Aha! Angry tears," May declared in a triumphant smile. She nodded at Birdie. "That's gotta be it." "Without a doubt," Birdie agreed.
Angry tears have magic in them, May explained, and Connor, his unique spear to be convincing. That would explain it, he said, cradling Duzu in a crook of his arm. I shot him a glance to see if he was making fun, but no. Connor seemed to be in complete agreement. You can't be serious, I said, rubbing my eyes. All three of you actually believe this? May put her hand near her mouth and said in a stage whisper, Willodeen doesn't believe in magic. Connor looked disappointed. Really? Is that true? Of course it's true, I said. You do? I believe there are things we don't understand, he said. That doesn't mean magic exists, I replied. There's magic in all of us, Verity said. Just a bit. We're born with it. Like fingers and toes and fuzzy baby hair. Some of us make use of it and some of it do not. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds coming from the shifting logs of the fire and Dooze's occasional questioning coos. Gertie gave a baby more water. I wonder how she got a notch on her right ear, she mused. I cleared my throat. I looked at Connor and Bertie and May, and all three of them ready, apparently, to believe anything of the creature in our midst. I sighed. I then told them about my tears and about the nick that they made in Connor's puzzler. We all gazed down at the baby as if her ear had held the answer to the world's most pressing questions. I believe, May said, at last, that you have just proved our point, Willodeen dear. Before I could respond, the baby let a loose, pitiful cry, and then we debate this another day, said Bertie. Magic or not, right now we got ourselves a hungry baby screecher, and nothing at all defeated. Chapter 24. I consulted my notebooks and tried to remember everything Pa had ever told me about screechers. When I first made my list of any food I thought they might eat, well, Bertie cleaned the scratch on my neck and the cloth soaked in one of her horrible smelling salves. It was an already appetizing list: worms, grubs, diddly bugs, slugs, peacock snails, pink mushrooms, aspen twigs, and sunferns. I didn't know where to start. She's so young, I said. Suppose she might still need mother's milk. Bertie sighed. I've not a clue. Nor I, said May. I've seen screechers rooting near the blue willows and I've seen screechers rooting near the blue willows and berry bushes, Connor offered. Come to think of it, I've even seen them digging through the trash bins in the village. Some animals will only eat a few things, I said. Hummingbirds are known to be very picky. They're like aphids, files, and blue willow leaves, and that's about it. The one in our home is definitely the exception of that rule, said May, leveling a finger to Duzu. I'm talking to you, cake stealer. I just don't know where to start, I said. You probably know more about screechers than the rest of the village put together, Willowdean, Connor said. I reached out my right index finger toward the baby, hoping to scratch at the top of her head. She looked so hopeful and so helpless, the baby sharply bit my finger. Ah! I cried. She didn't break my skin, but I was going to have it careful to be sharp baby teeth and those twinning tusks. She looked quite proud of herself and not nearly so helpless. And though she might be little, she's fierce, said May. Shakespeare, A Midsummer's Night Dream, Bertie sighed. Remember the production on Somerset? What a superb Titiana you were. Bird, you're so kind. May waved a hand. But we digress. What might we feed our new arrival? You both come up with the recipes before, I said. Remember the baby hedgehog we found and the banded tiger fox pup? Maybe you could come up with something for the screecher. Couldn't hurt to try, said May. Connor shifted uncomfortably. I really should go. My father will be wondering where I am. Will he be mad? I asked. He doesn't get mad, Connor smiled. He gets disappointed. Don't worry, Connor, he said. We will take good care of the wee one. You're puzzlers, I exclaimed. You need your basket. Puzzlers? Bertie repeated. We left Connor's hummingbird sculpture on the side of the road. We needed the baskets to capture the baby. You can use that wooden crate in the kitchen for the bed. For a bed, said Bertie. The one with potatoes and turnips in it. I emptied the crate and May gave me an old quilt to line it. Connor and I tilted the basket over the crate and the baby slid out of the slender in a snowy hill. To my surprise, you didn't seem all that annoyed. I think she actually enjoyed that, Connor said, laughing. Bertie tapped her finger on her chin. You know, she does need a name. I looked at Connor, my mind went blank, and she thought for a moment. She likes the Quinby to me. Quinby, I said. I had a dog named Quinby once. I used to howl in the night like a coyote. Or a screecher. I leaned toward the basket. Quinby, I whispered. He responded with a squeaky noise. I can't say that was a pleasant noise, but I took it as a good sign. All right, Duzu, I said. Say goodbye to Connor. Off you go, Duzu, Connor said, nudging him over the shoulder. Good luck with your father, I said. Good luck with your screecher, he said. I knew it would need it. Luck, skill, maybe even a little bit of magic. Chapter 25. The next 2 days were a blur of mixing, cutting, hunting, and a whole lot of guessing as we tried to coax Quinby to eat. Our first concoction included one mealworm, a piece of fern, 2 sunberries, and pinches of salt and sugar. May and Barry mashed it all up with a mortar and pestle and added a bit of warm water. And this is when it was my turn. I dripped a scrap of fabric into an awful-looking mess, then squeezed out droplets. Aiming for Quimby's mouth, Pa and I had done something similar with an abandoned baby whispered. We nursed it back to health. That nestling had opened its beak so wide he could have swallowed a very egg he pecked his way out of. He had been easy to feed. Quimby, unfortunately, was not. He let a mixture drip onto her snout, and she shook her head and grumbled at me. She could be ready for solid food, I said. Some critters wean quickly. Next, we tried all manner of bugs and vegetation. We cut everything into pieces, set a plate in front of Quimby, and stepped back, watching and hoping. Quimby sniffed once, twice, then backed away as if he deeply offended her. She's shivering, I said as I removed the plate. We quickly tried to cover her with May's quilt, but Quimby was shaking it off. May provided another one of the shawls, and I created a cozy nest for Quimby. That, at least, she seemed to appreciate. I'm worried, I told Birdie and May as we sipped the hot peppermint tea in the kitchen table. What if we won't eat? What if she won't eat? What if she just wastes away? If anyone knows Screeches, it's you, Birdie said. I know you'll figure something out. You'll figure it out. I don't know anything about magic screechers, I said. Except that they eat the same as regular ones, said May. I sat at the kitchen table, poring over my notebooks, looking at hints at screecher behavior I might have missed. Each entry brought back a memory in the way a familiar smell can instantly transport you to another place and time. 3.5 years ago, I watched 2 screechers eat purple toadlet. Peacock snails came up frequently in my notes year after year, and they were difficult to find these days. The autumn before last, I'd seen 2 adult screechers eating spotted oak moths. Well, there was nothing to do but keep trying. I heaved a sigh. Since we captured Quimby, I hadn't seen Connor. I hope he hadn't gotten into any trouble with his father about the puzzlers, or about spending time with me. Truth was, it would have been useful to hear Connor help forage in Quimby's food. Not that I wanted his company exactly, but an extra pair of hands digging for worms wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. I'm going to go out to look again, I announced. We'll keep an eye on Quimby, said May. Good hunting. It's heading toward twilight, said Birdie. Best take a lantern. I'll be back before dark, Birdie. Birdie clucked her tongue. Stubborn as the day is long, she said, and we both smiled. How many times since I moved in did she utter those same words to me? Still remembering how I needed to borrow Connor's lantern, I relented and grabbed one. Duzu noticed me donning my coat and made his questioning noise. Normally, he would have fluttered to my shoulder, anxious to go outside. But since Quimby's arrival, he spent all his time perched in the chair near her crate, like a worried big brother. Good luck, Maid called, and Duzu sent me a soft, encouraging coo. It was another day of autumn weather. The dragon's sighs were strong, whipping past the sudden burst, and so warm I considered moving my coat. I kicked through piles of crisp brown leaves and savored the sound. All the while, I kept my eyes open for bugs and greens that might appeal to our hungry baby screecher. I headed up the road. Connor had mentioned a small stand of blue willows up by the way. I thought I might find something there. Like him, I'd seen screechers digging near blue willow roots now and then. There were 2 other spots where I found screechers nesting in the past, and planned to check those areas too. I moved my notebook from the waist pouch and made certain I remembered the precise locations. As I thumbed through the pages, I heard someone call my name. It was Connor, and he was with his father. My first instinct was to duck into the bushes. It wasn't exactly sure why, but after my performance at the council meeting, I had a feeling Mr. Burke when it might best be avoided. Willodeen, Connor yelled, up here! Apparently, hiding was not an option. I took a deep breath, and up the hill I went. Chapter 26. Father, this is Willodeen, Connor said as I neared. Ah, yes, from the council meeting, said Mr. Burke. I expected a mocking tone, but I didn't hear one, so I made myself meet his eyes. To my surprise, his gaze was thoughtful, maybe even kind. Somehow, close up, he looked tired and weathered, less intimidating than he had in the meeting. I could see Connor and him and Connor. Connor rubbed his back of his neck. How is everything? Fine, I answered, as relieved both seemed to understand where no talk of Quimby in front of father. I pointed to the paper Connor was holding. What's that? A map, he said. They're thinking about expanding the rail route. Father and I came up to get a better look at things. Below us, village lights glowed in the shadow of the hills and the twilight descended. From this height, perchance seemed puny and fragile, as delicate as one of Connor's puzzlers. They're purposing a cut through Sutton's Bridge, Mr. Burke said, pointed northeast. It would bring the railroad closer to the river and the mill. We were buffeted by a fresh gust of wind, and the trees shivered, our coats ballooned, and the map nearly flew out of Connor's hands. Dragon's eyes are fierce this year, Connor said, struggling to hold the map. Last time they were like this, 2 years back? Mr. Burke asked. That's when we had a round up ridge fire. the one that started up near the tracks. As if on cue, a steam engine chugged through the hills just west of us. We could see it in the dark, confident body and steamy breath. As it barked into a slow halt, red sparks sprayed. At the meeting, I said, and I paused, suddenly self-conscious. That man, Mr. Williams, I think, said something about the railroad and the fires. They've cleared brush near the tracks, best they can, I'm told, said Mr. Burke. Only so much we can do, though. The railroad doesn't much care for what we have to say, and they own the land. Connor pointed a cleared strip for the forest, where the land of the blue willows had been planted years ago. Those willows don't look like they're doing well, he said. I told them it was a bad idea to plant there. Blue willows crave water, ponds, rivers, lakes. Mr. Burke shook his head. But we're outnumbered. The train brings tourists. The blue willows bring hummingbirds. Everybody should be happy. Only it doesn't always work out that way, he gave a short laugh. That's what they like to call progress. Another blast of hot wind came, so strong I almost lost my balance. I dropped my notebook, and Mr. Burke knelt down and handed it to me. Are you an honest like Connor? He asked. No, I said, quickly returning the notebook into my waist pouch. I take notes on things. The woods, the animal changes. I wondered if he scoffed and merely nodded. A scholar, then? I didn't have the nerve to tell him I rarely attended school. A scholar I definitely was not. Well, good for you. The world is changing. We need more scientists, inventors, people who look at everything in fresh ways. I visited the capital last month. Whole town lit by gas lamps, and I was a wonder to see, perchance, with something catching up to do. We'll always need artists, too, I said, smiling at Connor. He looked at his feet the way I often did. Perhaps, said Mr. Burke, brow creased. I was just worried about the future. It's my job as a parent. We fell silent, gazing in the village as the sun shot crimson arrows through the trees. You know, Mr. Burke mused after a spell, Connor's mother used to do that. Keep a notebook. I wasn't sure what to say. Connor had never mentioned his mother before. For her, it was birds, Mr. Burke continued. She drew them, studied them, counted them. It was probably where Connor got his artistic abilities. Does she still keep the notebook? I asked. She died of a red fever when Connor was 3. Oh, I didn't know. What did you say to people who lost someone they loved? What did the people say to me? Nothing that ever changed anything. I'm sorry, I said, too softly and too late. Well, we should get going, said Mr. Burke. Good to meet you, Willodeen. I nodded to them both and stared off, but a moment later I heard Connor running back to me. Is Quimby all right? He whispered. She's not eating, I said. That's why I'm out here. Thought I might find some peacock snails and red leaf beetles. I'm running out of ideas. I'll come by tomorrow to help. I couldn't today or yesterday, but I'd repair a lot of those puzzlers. I'm sorry about that, he grinned. It was worth it, he said. He pointed towards the cluster of fir trees. If you're looking for peacock snails, there's that grove of blue willows I told you about. Just 5 of them, hidden away. But it might be worth a try. Go that way. He pointed to the left. Then listen for a stream. I'll check it out. Connor crossed his fingers. I watched him lope down the hill to catch up with his father. As I headed into the trees, the high-pitched whistle of steam engine carried to the wind, harsh and plaintive as the screecher's call. Chapter 27. That evening, I tried feeding Quimby some petals in the late-blooming silver pansy. She practically sneered. I gave her a pulverized wing of the spotted oak moth. No luck. I presented with 2 red leaf beetles, and I managed to find another decaying log. Nope. Finally, I placed a saucer of peacock snails in front of her. Quickly let out a speech of joy. She planted her 2 front teeth in the saucer and gobbled down the snail so quickly I was afraid she'd choke. Duzu watched from his perch near Quimby's crate, cooing nervously at her table manners. Well, well, said Bertie. I think you found the magic recipe, Willodeen. The snails were the size of my thumbnail, and her swirling multicolored shells were softened to the touch. I'd managed to find 5 of them by digging with great effort at the base of the blue willows Connor had told me about. It hadn't been easy. The snails liked to burrow deep and beneath the tangled tree roots. My knuckles were bloodied, my fingernails black with soil. I sighed with satisfaction. I felt so good to provide for Quimby. A memory came to me, my pa watching a screecher and her baby, saying, She's just doing what she's meant to do, my girl. Caring for her own, best she can. Like all of us, ma's and pa's. Still, I felt the poor peacock snails. After all, they're living creatures too, but that doesn't way of things, isn't it? Didn't I eat hen's eggs and river trout and venison? I feel guilty about the snails, I admitted. They're so pretty, and there they were, minding their own business until I came along. Bertie, who was chopping onions, nodded. Nature's complicated that way. I know some folks who only eat things that grow in the ground. Then she thought for a moment. Not sure where peacock snails would fit into that equation. Quimby's belly expanded like a coin purse, filling with gold. The snails were so hard to get to, I said. You could try the blue willows down by the riverfront, said May as her knitting needles clicked away. And that's where, and there's that new grove, said Bertie, although those trees were still pretty young. Connor's father said those trees needed more water, I said. You saw his father, asked May. And Connor, I said. At the top of the ridge. There's talk of the railroad expanding. Ah, said Matt. Is that a good I asked, or a bad one? Neither, said May. Change is coming, certain as sunrise. The only question is how we deal with it. I sat back, arms behind my head, watching Quimby lick her dish clean. What am I gonna do with her? She can stay here forever. She's a wild thing, unless, of course. Unless, said Bertie. I don't know, unless she isn't real. Unless this magic is gonna pass. She looks pretty real to me, said Bertie. May laughed. Certainly eats like she's real. I basked in her good-hearted smiles, as warming as the fire. Taking me in must have completely upended their lives, the same way talking to Quimby has complicated my life. Thank you, I murmured. For what? Bertie asked. For letting me be here, I said. And Duzu and Quimby. Fiddle-faddle, said Bertie. I second her fiddle-faddle, said May. The night I settled into bed, with Duzu and Quimby beside me. They both snored as if they were having a conversation. I smiled. I wish Connor could hear them. Closing my eyes, I wondered if sleep would hide me tonight, as so often did. I need have worried. The gentle snores of my two companions made for a perfect lullaby. Part 4. The screechers awaken in her nest. Is that what it is? It listens to the night world. The nest is hard, flat sides, and smells of trees. And on open top, she is wrapped in warmth that makes her heart slow, her breathing calm. How full she is, how good it is to finally eat what her body seems to know it needs. She has been two kinds of animals thus far in her short life. One is fur-covered and winged. He perches close in watching her with wide eyes. He is different in many ways, but he's more like her than the other animals she has met. They are tall and clumsy in their movements, and they're making strange noises, sweet highs and gruff lows and long exhaustions. Whatever they are, they haven't hurt her. The first time they reached into her nest, she recoiled. Wetness was there, water. She had no idea how thirsty she was. More came, more and more, than food. Green, brown, wet, alive, dead, all wrong. She waited. Patience had served her well so far, and then there it was, the right food at last. She had to keep waiting. She may survive. If she survives it, she may learn how to be whatever she meant to be. Being alive takes all the energy she can muster, but it seems to be full of possibilities. She will take her time, she will hope, and she will rely on others, and on these strange animals who study her so carefully. There was no other choice. Nearby the red-furred animal, the hood-bringer, is sleeping. On her pillow is a small flying beast. She opens her one eye, and he lets off a soft trill. The screecher returns his gaze. He replies with a sound new to her, a grumbly purr. The flying beast goes back to sleep. Moonlight pours in and the pools in the nest. Night is when another kind of sound happens, but she's not ready for that. Not yet. Chapter 28. Connor and I spent the next morning trying to unearth more peacock's nails. She brought the knife he used for cutting reeds, and I borrowed a trowel from May and Bertie's garden. After 2 hours, 3 cuts, and several scraped knuckles of the endless holes, we had only 8 snails to show for our efforts. It looks so easy when the screechers do it, I said, stretching my weary arms. No matter where we dig, it ends up being the wrong place. Wait a minute, Connor exclaimed. His smile got lopsided when he was excited. Maybe that's the answer. What if we let Quimby do the digging? The very thought made me panic. But if she runs off, what if the hunter sees her? I have an idea, Connor said. Give me an hour. By noon, we were back at the cottage, with a strange contraption Connor had created out of reeds and willow branches. As soon as we entered, Duzu fluttered over to Connor's shoulder. Quimby poked her head over the side of her crate, her snout quivering. Well, what do we have here? May asked, looking at her never-ending knitting. It's a harness, I said, for Quimby. At least we hope it is. I placed Quimby's peacock's nails on a plate, and she ate them in a flash. She sent me a hopeful look. Sorry, girl, I said. That's all we could find. We're going to let Quimby do her own hunting, Connor explained. I like your thinking, said May. First, we have to get Quimby into a harness. Without a tall order, her claws were already longer and sharper. Gingerly, I picked her up and scruffed her neck, and as always a mother dog would hold a puppy. With Connor, May, and Bertie all working at once, we managed to slip the harness over Quimby's head and ease her 2 front paws into the holes. I found some rope, and Connor tied it to the 2 loops we made on top of the harness. What if this isn't ridiculous sight, said Bertie, but an ingenious one. We let Quimby roam the cottage so she could get used to the harness. She moved around like a tin soldier, her legs stiff, trying to gain the grab of the rope with her teeth. She was clearly not happy with us. I really didn't want to do this, I said. It doesn't feel right, having a wild thing tied up. But if we were to run away, I don't know what I'd do, I frowned. We're hoping she'll be able to send out a peacock's snails out better than we can. Not to mention dig them, Connor added. Connor had brought his basket, and we loaded Quimby in that. Along with May's blanket, the basket had two handles, so we each took a side, and Connor held the rope as well, and I put a coat over the top, and off we went. The passed a couple of people in the road, and nobody said a word, and Quimby, thankfully, was fairly quiet, although she poked her nose out a couple of times to take in the new exciting smells. By the time we reached the hidden grove they had dug that morning, Quimby was making eager squeaking noises and scratching in the sides of the basket. I wondered what she's thinking, Connor said. Me too, I said. Probably trying to figure out what ridiculous humans are up to. We slid her out of the basket. Quimby blinked, stunned, and looked up and down all around. She pulled on her rope and get close to the willow roots. Then she went to work. We have seen a dog bury a bone or a spotted green chipmunk rooting for lost acorn. You'll know that what I'm talking about. Quimby clawed near those trees with utter certainty. She reached her goal. Every so often she stopped to sniff around, her snout quivering, and every time she dug, she found a treasure trove of peacock snails. Dozens upon dozens. She knows exactly where to dig, I said. Her sense of smell is amazing. And their actual smell, Connor joked. When screechers were invented, Mother Nature made them scented. I laughed. I had never heard that before. My pa would have liked it. It was strange hearing myself say pa out loud. I couldn't remember the last time I had. I've made it up just now. Connor tightened his grip in Quimby's rope. I've actually been trying to write a story about Quimby, about how she must feel, and how she came to be. He gave me an embarrassed smile. It's not very good. I doubt that, he hesitated. Maybe I could read it someday. I still don't know how it ends. I don't even know how much about her yet. And that's what I like about watching Screechers, trying to figure it all out. Like your ma with the birds, I suppose. I cast a sidelong on Gaz to see if I made a mistake bringing up Connor's ma, but he was smiling, same as me. She would have liked you, I think, Connor said, my mother. I bet I would have liked her too. He scratched his forehead, looking bemused. I know, it's funny. I don't think I've talked to anyone about my mother in years, except maybe my father, and hardly even then. I know what you mean. I stared at Quimby so Connor wouldn't see the tears forming my eyes. It's tough for most folks to understand unless they'd gone through it. He didn't say anything more. We didn't have to. While Connor watched Quimby dig and eat, I pulled out my notebook and jotted down a thing and everything. I walked around the 5 willows, trying to count the number of peacock snails Quimby ate. She definitely seemed to prefer 2 trees in particular. I felt the dirt twirling leaves. Using my feet, I measured the distance from the willows to the stream, measuring downhill. What are you looking for? Connor asked. I don't know, I admitted. I never do. I just have a feeling that looking will lead me to the right questions and maybe even the right answers. I worked on quietly, and the only noises rustle of the leaves and scrabbling Quimby's calls and the stream walking. Silence filled the sound. It was. I let Quimby in, and she looked over at us, her belly swollen, her eyes glazed, and gave a content belch. I was certain how I'd tell the screecher was happy, but I was pretty sure we had carried one home that afternoon. Chapter 29. Every morning after that, Connor and I took Quimby to the same spot. We quickly got used to the harness, which we removed as soon as we safely back to the cottage. In fact, she seemed associated with the snail hunting and sat calmly as we slipped her into it. Most days, Doozer joined us. He always rode on Connor's shoulder. Sometimes they would talk to each other, and one in words and one in coos, and I'd also listen along. Quimby was growing so fast that Connor decided to make a larger harness. He had witched a wheelbarrow covered with tarp because she was too heavy to carry in the basket. Her tusks were sharper, her tail quills were no longer soft to the touch. She drooled a bit, growled sometimes, and just generally looked less like a cute baby, more like a frightening animal that she was meant to be. Still, Quimby never screeched at night. I often wondered why. She also became more flexible about her diet. We gradually began to add more foods, especially grubs and ferns, to her plates. And she would eat them and run out of their peacock snails, but the snails were still clearly her favorite food. One morning, Connor and I went uphill and found the dragon's size kicking up whirlpools of dust. Fire weather, Connor commented, and then looked troubled. Sorry, he said. No, it's all right. We never talked about the fire that killed my family, but Connor knew what happened. It must have been awful, he said. It was, but awful things happen to a lot of people. True. Our conversations were often like that, just a handful of words. I liked it. The silences were comfortable as an old sweater. Walking in the forest with Connor was almost like walking alone. Like me, he was calm and watchful, though he was searching for different things. Connor was always looking to look out for petals and stones, reeds and cattails. I was always searching, unlikely as I knew it was, for more screechers, and of course, we both kept our eyes open for many honey bears. At the time we reached the hidden grove, Quimby was lurking hard to escape the wheelbarrow. As soon as we let her out, she dashed at a blue willow, nearly toppling me in her hurry. Doozer was always sat on Connor's shoulder, preening himself. When we began cooing loudly and persistently, even Quimby turned to see what the commotion was about. I decided Duzu makes 3 distinct noises, said Connor. 1 for yes, 1 for no, and 1 for maybe. Which one is that? I asked Connor. Oh, that's yes for sure, he said. That's a very noisy yes. Calm down, Duzu, I chided. But his coos only grew more spirited. He craned his neck, and I followed his upward gaze. There, settled in a luminous bubbled nest, were 3 hummingbears. Connor, I whispered, pointing. Look! He gasped. I can't believe it. They're the first ones I've seen in ages, Duzu said, made a noise. Well, except for you, of course. Poor Duzu, I said. I wish you could join them. It's not fair. Lots of things aren't fair, Connor said, and I wonder what they're thinking about his ma, or maybe even about my family. We stared at the nest, reflecting the sun, each one a little miracle. The hummingbirds murmured like the other one, like doves. But why are they here? I asked. We haven't seen any in Riverfront. Why are they always used to migrate? There aren't any in those new groves they planted either. One of the hummingbirds chewed a willow leaf, and after a few minutes he blew a glistening, perfectly round bubble about the size of my palm. Playfully he added it to the top layer of his nest. It's amazing the way bubbles stick to each other, said Connor. And to the tree, I added, but not a hummingbear fur. It must be something about the leaf sap. I wish I understood it. I'd love to make my puzzler pieces hold together like that. The bubbles are strong too, I said. I found one in the ground once and I tried to pop it. I couldn't do it. Does Duzu ever make bubbles? He used to, I said. He doesn't bother much anymore. I guess my pillow is just a nest now. Reached over to stroke Duzu's head. I sure wish I knew why they've chosen this spot. Maybe it's because it's so secluded, Connor suggested. Could that be that hummingbears don't like crowds any more than you do? I smiled. But in years past, crowds didn't bother them, and they don't seem to mind that we're here, with a screecher no less. I chewed on a thumbnail, considering. We brought Duzu a few times. I suppose the scent might have attracted him. We waited until Quimpy had eaten her fill of snails, and we headed back to the cottage. Duzu, still on Connor's shoulder, chomped on a willow leaf as we walked. We were halfway down the hill when Quimpy dozing halfway in a wheelbarrow when I heard noises in the trees to my right. I caught a glint of a rifle barrel. 3 men crashed through the brush. One of them was Oaten Boren, carrying his bow and a quiver, arrows at the ready. We froze. Well, if it ain't the Screecher girl, said Oatwell. He sauntered over, blocking our path forward. What's in the barrel? I slightly begged Quimby to stay still. Smells like something ripe, said his friend with a shotgun. Could be a Screecher, said the other. A swallow passed a lump in my throat. About an inch of Quimby's tail was poking out of the tarp. Well, as you know, I always smell like a Screecher, I said, as casual as I could. Connor took a step forward. Actually, it's manure, he said. We got plenty more than we need. Want some? Dung and Screechers? Otwell's lip curled. Perfect company for you, girl. He packed up a couple paces and took the opportunity to swerve the barrel past the 3 men. You still owe me an arrow, Otwell called, but we were already rushing down the hill. That was close. Next time we might not be so lucky, Connor said as we neared the cottage. We can't do this forever, Willodeen. I know, I said, panting. I keep thinking we'll figure everything out. We rode the barrel to the back of the cottage and let Quimby leap out. My father's going to be thrilled to hear about the hummingbears, Connor said. And if more show up, maybe the fair will actually happen after all. Connor, I said, do you think maybe can we just wait a day or two before we say anything about the hummingbears? Why? Everyone will be so relieved. I know, I just feel like there's something I need to figure out. There are all these pieces and I can only look long enough, I know. But it doesn't make sense. I can't explain it. Sounds like my puzzlers, he said. Sometimes you just gotta have give idea room to breathe. One day, I said. He nodded, sure. Come on, Duzu, I said, holding at my arm. Only then did I notice the little bubble he'd blown. It was oddly shaped, and he clutched it in his paws, looked quite pleased. Then he let it go. He watched it float in the air, impossibly strong and possibly lovely.
Chapter 30. I woke that night to a horrible sound, a full-throated screaming into the blackness. Screecher loud. It wasn't a Screecher, it was me. May and Bertie rushed into my room. Bertie held a flickering candle. They perched on my bed, each taking a side. Duzu moved to my lap, and Quimby watched from the crate she had nearly outgrown. The wind toyed in my lace curtains. Fire dream again? Asked May. I nodded. In my head, they were still there, the flames grabbing for me like hungry monster, the soles of my feet blistering, the poisonous smoke scorching my lungs. I looked at Bertie and May and asked the question. Why, the one I'd asked 100 times before. Why, I sobbed, then found my voice. Why did I make it out when they didn't? They didn't meant my ma and pa and brother. And I knew that they were going to say, like they always did, no one knows why, Willodeen, but we are so glad you did. I hated that answer. I wanted those to make sense in the world. I needed them to promise I would always be protected, even though I knew it was impossible. I yearned to hear, and they all lived happily ever after. No one knows why. Well, why not? I wanted to scream. But yet, so despite all that, part of me welcomed their honesty. Bertie and May were grown-ups who weren't afraid to admit that they didn't have all the answers. It was scary, but it also sparked something inside me I couldn't explain, a feeling that maybe I could find the answers I needed, even if they couldn't.
I looked into the main room where embers glowed beneath the hearth, soothing and necessary. Fire could look so harmless and be so deadly. The wind surged, leaned my head on May's shoulder. Do you smell smoke outside? No, said May. No, said Bertie. And even if you do, don't forget, Willodeen, not all wildfires are started by people. Sometimes they're nature's way of cleaning out a forest to make room for new growth. I didn't know that, I admitted. That's something you might learn more about if you went to school now and again, May said. I groaned and May held up her palms. Just a thought. Keep in mind that while we may seem like bottomless fronts of knowledge, said Bertie with a wry smile, even May and I have our limitations. She nodded at Quimby. With our Screecher friend, for example, I'm afraid we haven't been not much use to you. As clouds moved past the moon, Quimby shifted. She tilted her head back, mouth open, and for a moment I thought she was going to attempt an actual screech. But no, it was just a yawn. What do you think will happen to Quimby? I asked. Again, I received no answers, just wistful smiles and warm hugs. Whatever happens, we'll be here to help you, Willowdean, May said. We love you more than life itself. Do you understand that? I knew I should have said something then. Thank you. I love you too. Instead, I just stroked Duzu and gave a quick nod. Do you want us to stay until you fall asleep? Bertie asked. No thanks, I said. I have Duzu and Quimby. I sniffed the air. You sure you don't smell smoke? I smell Screecher, Bertie replied, and that is all I smell. I attempted a smile. Then Screechers were invented, Mother Nature made 'em scented, I said. Connor made that up. He seems like a good friend, May said, and then she kissed my forehead. What, is he a friend? Or I've made an actual friend, me, against all the odds? After they left, I stared at Quimby, sitting there, obedient as a pet dog. As out of place as I sometimes felt, how must she feel? Why are you here, Quimby? I asked. She replied in a snort, and I laughed in spite of myself. Am I going to do with you? Another snort. I sighed. If the unthinkable could happen, and if our family could vanish in a moment, why couldn't a sculpture of Screecher come to life? If horrible things were possible, why not magical ones? I closed my eyes, and I knew sleep would not be coming. Not when I could still hear the angry wind, and when I had seen the places dreams could take me. Chapter 31. The next day, Connor had helped his father was more set up for the fair, then attend an afternoon council meeting. After I'd done my morning chores, I put Quimby in her harness, attached the rope, and loaded her into the wheelbarrow. Quiet girl, I warned, covering with the tarp. By now she knew the wheelbarrow meant an adventure involving food, and she settled quickly. With Duzu on my shoulder, I headed toward the top of the ridge. I wanted to spend as much time as I could find at the grove before word got out about the hummingbears. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just that ordinary part of me making trouble again. Maybe it was just because the standard blue willows had become a special place for Connor and me. One I did not want to share, even though I knew I had to. This afternoon, as I promised myself, I would tell everyone about the hummingbears, no matter what. I thought I could manage the wheelbarrow without Connor, but I was sadly mistaken. Took all my strength to make it up the hill, and I stopped several times to rest. With every pause, Quimby popped out her head and greeted the world. When she finally reached the hidden grove, I tried Quimby's rope around a blue willow trunk. Good thing Pa taught me how to make a nice solid knot when I was still young. Sweet coos drifted down, shifting my eyes. I looked up to see not 3, but 7 hummingbears, with each in bubble nests. They now occupied 2 separate blue willows, and bubbles gleamed, silvering the sun with prisms. The hummingbears looked completely at home. 3 of them were doozing, 2 were grooming themselves, and the other 2 looking down at me. Duzu and Quimby with intense curiosity. Quimby went to work for digging their meal, one of 2 of their favorite trees, while I retrieved my notebook from my pouch. What was I looking for? Was I hoping to learn that I didn't already know? I pulled a couple blue willow twirls and gave them to Duzu. He ate one whole, then he chewed the next one slowly and produced a perfect bubble. Meanwhile, Quimby excavated energy and was almost frightening. But that was, of course, her job, to stay alive, to be what she was meant to be. Poor Duzu never could be that lucky. He could never be totally free, completely himself, could Quimby. For the next hour, I counted, I sorted, I noted, I sketched, I measured. Mostly I wondered. Sometimes I simply wondered if I was doing what I was wondering about. Connor was right. We were going to do the same thing, putting puzzle pieces together. He looked at nature and made art from it. I looked at nature and made sense of it. Tried to anyway. Sunlight filtered through the trees, the air warmed, and the wind picked up, angry and edgy. By now, Quimby had dug in several spots, but he'd focused most of her energy on holes near the 2 willows closest to the stream. The same trees where hummingbears were nesting. I felt the soil near one of the holes. It was slightly damp. Soft dirt meant easier digging. At least it did if you had screecher claws, and she was finding plenty of peacock snails, and the fact the deeper the hole, the more snails she seemed to uncover. But why had the hummingbears chosen the same 2 trees for nesting? Because they were a bit closer to the water? Hummingbears weren't diggers. They wouldn't care if the soil had more porous. I examined the leaves on each of the 5 willows. There They were in full autumn attire, vivid blue on one side, shiny silver on the other. Twisting the red ribbons of the enormous gift, I removed the dead leaf from each tree and laid them side by side, held down by stones and keep them from blowing away. Strange, the way hummingbirds were so particular about what they ate and where they nested. A lot of creatures were more open-minded. It seemed to me, take screechers, they nested wherever they could, and even picky Quimby would learn to eat more than just peacock's nails. I thought of my brother Toby when he was 1.5, and he refused to eat anything but porridge for months on end. I remember Ma groaning, "Give me strength," as Toby turned up his nose to anything but lumpy porridge. The more lumps, the better. It seemed like a bad idea, all things considered. If you were open to eating lots of different things, wouldn't that make your life easier? If you could nest anywhere, wouldn't that give you the more chances to find a safe resting place? Pieces upon pieces, questions upon questions. I was getting nowhere. I gathered my leaf samples and placed them in a notebook, labeled the numbers 1 from 5, and I wasn't sure what I'd do with them. I could always give them to Duzu for a snack, although we tried to keep a good supply in hand. By the time we departed, Duzu had made 3 impressive bubbles, and Quibi was giddy full. He seemed the only one who left feeling disappointed.
Chapter 32. I dropped Doozy and Quimby off at the cottage. May and Bertie were napping in their rockers. They looked so fragile, almost childlike. Gently, I covered them both with quilts. I chopped several logs, cleaned the hen house, and swept the front porch. When I grabbed a towel, tucked it into my waist pouch and my notebook, I headed down to the village. Meeting as still in session, I could hear the villagers talking, or was it arguing? Peeking around the half-open front door, I caught a glimpse of Connor. He was sitting in his usual spot, sketching while red-faced man droned on and on. I waited, hoping Connor might look over and see me, but he seemed to be lost in another world. Down the river walked the willow leaves tangled in a fitful wind. And still no hummingbirds. Clouds scudded through the pale sky. I took some deep breath. Was that smoke? Or would I be asking the same question for the rest of my life? I took out a trowel and walked past each blue willow. Every now and then I poked into the soil at the base of the trunk. I never before tried digging for snails there, but almost every time I found some. More, in fact, than I'd ever seen. Entire villages of them. How Quibi would love to come here, I thought, with a rueful smile. Of course, she couldn't. She killed for the bounty, or chased off at the very least. I pulled a few leaves from several trees, ignoring the strange looks I got from passers-by. When I made my way to the hillside where their new grove of blue willows had been planted, the ones Connor's father had said needed more water. Sure enough, they seemed saunted and dry. I collected leaves from them too. On the way back to the cottage, I looked samples of the leaves on other kind of trees, oaks and purple maples, butternuts and striped elms. May and Bertie were still napping when I returned. Quimby greeted me with a polite snuffle. I checked my bed where Doozy was dozing off on my pillow. The 3 bubbles laid nearby, stuck together in the form of a triangle. The new bubble will still separate from the others. Sat next to his right paw. Made me happy as he'd taken up bubble blowing again, something he would be doing in the wild. It was so quite convenient since I needed to borrow a bubble. Returning to the kitchen, I pulled a sheet of paper from my notebook and tore it into pieces. On each scrap paper, I wrote the number and location. Hidden Grove 1, Hidden Grove 2, 3, 4, and 5. I took my samples from the riverside willows and new blue willow grove and the leaves I collected from random trees. One by one, I laid them out on the kitchen table. Below them, I placed my 5 leaf samples in the Hidden Grove. Tiptoeing back to the bedside, I picked up Doozy's single bubble. Fortunately, he was a sound sleeper. I felt a tad guilty borrowing his creation, but I knew he could always make more bubbles. Back at the table, I started with the 5 riverbank willow leaf samples. I touched Doozy's bubble to the first leaf. The bubble and the leaf should have stuck together instantly, but they didn't. Same thing for the other 4 leaves. Next, I tried the new willow grove samples. The bubble slid right off every leaf. I followed each leaves and other types of trees. The same thing happened. That didn't surprise me. Pa told me the bubble nest only stuck to blue willow leaves. Still, I wanted to be sure. It was time for the Hidden Grove samples. Leaf 1, leaf 2, leaf 3, nothing. The bubble refused to attach. It was down to 2 more leaves. Number 4 and 5 were Quimby's preferred trees, where she did most of all of her digging. The trees where 7 hummingbird nests were situated. Gently, I touched the bubble leaf 4. The bubble stuck. It was like fitting the right key into a stubborn lock. I moved the bubble, now trailing a leaf, to a Hidden Grove leaf 5. Once again the leaf I heard, and once again I could not separate the bubble from the leaf. I stared at the table, covered with leaves and scraps of paper. I grinned. When I got out my notebook, I began to write as fast as my pencil could let me. I wrote the same way Quimby had dug in the morning, hungrily, with a sense of purpose, as if I was doing what I was meant to do. Chapter 33. When I was done with my notes, I ran back to the village. I had to tell someone that someone was Connor. More than anyone, he'd appreciate how I puzzled something through. How I might even have an answer to the village hummingbird problem. Near the bottom of the hill, I saw Miss Rossett, a teacher, talking to Connor's father. "Hello, Willodeen," she said.
I was surprised when she remembered me. I had been ages since I had been to school. You certainly look excited, said Miss Burke. I figured something out, I exclaimed. Something? Well, I think it might be really important. No sooner were the words out of my mouth than I could feel my face flushing. I looked down at the ground, instantly self-conscious. Can you tell us more? Asked Miss Rossett. I started to answer when I looked back up at Miss Rossett. Her smile had faded into a look of alarm. The wind had kicked up yet again, and with it came an unmistakable smell. Smoke, she said. But of course, I already knew. I checked up the hills, trying to place the fire. Up there! I pointed to the rooftop, round top ridge, where the train tracks were, the same place the last big fire had started. Another strong gust, and the fire burst to life. It was beautiful in its fury, the blowing gray smoke and its eddies and swirls, the red flood of flames moving slowly toward the village, the sparks and embers popping and fading like fireflies. I gulped, trying to quell the panic in my chest. My father and baby are at home, said Miss Rossett, wringing her hands. I've got to check on them. Will you be all right, Willodeen? Yes. I think Connor's down by the river. I need to find him. Mr. Burke gripped my shoulders. Be careful, Willodeen. I will. Around us, villagers moved purposely. Some ran toward the river, carrying buckets. Others had shovels and hoes. Despite the quickening flames, the calm determination filled the air. After all, we'd seen through this before. I've been through this before. And the searing burns on my feet, my lungs scraped raw, the screams of my family. I needed to run, to hide, but where could I possibly be safe? And then it hit me. I didn't want to run away. I wanted to run toward Bertie, May, Duzu, Quinby. I had no time to waste. Spinning around, I raced back up the hill to the cottage, to the place where everything I needed and loved could be found, to my home. Chapter 34. By the time I neared the cottage, May and Bertie were already heading down the road, calling for me. Willodeen, Bertie cried, and she and May wrapped me in their arms. I wiped my swinging eyes and pointed at Bertie's feet. You're only wearing one shoe. As soon as we smelled smoke, we dashed out of the door, May said, and I couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying. We weren't sure where you were. It doesn't matter now, said Bertie. We're all here. We're all safe. She nodded toward the round top rib. Same place as last time. It's moving slowly, though, and veering east a bit. The cottage will probably be fine, unless the wind changes. Still, I'm worried sick about the folks other that way. I heard a frantic cooing sound and turned to see Duzu, half fluttering, half running toward me. Duzu, I said, and he landed on my shoulder, rubbing his head against my neck. Oh my, May slapped a hand on her cheek. The door, we left it open. We all thought it, and no one said it. Quinby. I ran back to the cottage with Duzu hanging on for dear life. May and Bertie trailed behind. The front gate was wide open, so was the cottage door. Quinby, I yelled, my pulse hammering. Quinby! Her box was empty, the cottage was deserted. We checked the yard, the shed, everything in the hiding place we could think of. She's gone, I whispered. I suppose I figured I said it quietly enough, it might be not true. She's probably just hiding in the woods, said May, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I'm so sorry, love. All we could think of was getting to you. I patted May's back. It's not your fault. Maybe, said Bertie. She went up to the grove where you and Connor go. Connor, I said. Mr. Burke was looking for him. My heart was tearing apart like a piece of wet paper. I wanted to protect May and Bertie and Duzu. I wanted to find Quibby. I wanted to make sure that Connor was safe. I'm going back down to the village, I said. I have to see if Connor's all right. You can't, May began to cut her off. Well, I don't need water buckets, I said. You two stay there with Duzu. Keep an eye out for Quinby in case she comes back. Bertie and May exchanged a look that spoke volumes. I was the child, and they were the adults, and I was held so healthy and able-bodied, and they were not. I could see they wanted to stop me, and I could see they weren't going to. If I can help, I want to try, I said, and they both nodded. I'll come straight back here and fetch you when the fire changes course, I promise. Take the buckets from the front porch, said Bertie. I never before heard her voice tremble. I set Duzu on the chair and gave May and Bertie a quick hug. 4 buckets were right outside the door, and grabbed 2 and left 2 for May and Bertie, hoping against hope they wouldn't need them. I didn't let myself say the words until I reached the front gate. I love you, I called. Chapter 35. Smoke hung from the village like a menacing fog. The air was yellow-gray. It hurt to breathe. I stared at the riverfront, no Connor. I tried the village hall again, nothing. No doubt his father had found him. Connor would probably be fine, and yet I couldn't stop thinking, what if, what if? Near the carousel, Bucket Brigade was hard at work. A long line of villagers snaked from the fountain to the edge of the woods. There the fire appeared to be heading. The first person in line scooped out water into the pails, pots, and buckets, when passed it down. Meanwhile, 2 other groups dug trenches and cleared brush on the hillside, hoping to contain the fire's spread. Practically every resident seemed to be there. People were sweating and panting, their faces smudged with soot, their cheeks marked with tears. I walked down the line, choking and coughing like everyone else, and finally there he was. Connor saw me. His grin practically overtook his whole face. Willodeen, he cried as he passed the metal pail of the woman beside him. My father said he saw you, but I was still worried. He wiped his brow with the back of the hand. Really worried. Everyone's fine, I said. I paused. Except Quinby. She disappeared. Connor vanished. His face fell. You're sure? I'm sure. I want to say more, but I wasn't the right time. Took the buckets from the fountain, headed to the end of the line. I joined my neighbors in their fight. Our fight. We worked together for hours. After the fountain ran dry, we took turns hauling water from the river. When the wind picked up, we covered our faces in handkerchiefs and bandanas. When our hands blistered from the buckets and shovels, we tied scrapes of cloth around our palms. We helped each other because we were all we had. Because we knew against the brutal, timeless forces of nature, the best we could hope for was a truce.
Chapter 36. By midnight, the wind had calmed, the flames had faded in the waft of the glowing embers. Against the full moon sky, skeletons of burnt trees marked the fire's path. A few buildings were damaged, but except for some blistered hands, stinging eyes, and lingering coughs, no one was badly hurt. It was, we all knew, a miracle. Connor and I agreed to meet the next morning. Exhausted as we were, neither of us slept well. As dawn broke, we were already searching for Quimby. We brought Duzu on the off chance his presence might draw her out. Naturally, we started in the hidden grove since it was our best hope. There was no sign of her, although the number of bubble nests had grown to 11. Connor gazed up at the nest. 11, he marveled. I wish I understood why they keep coming here. Actually, I think I may have figured it out, I said. Connor's mouth dropped open. What? He cried. Why didn't you tell me? I was about to yesterday, then the fire came. And what with losing Quimby and all, I'd been so thrilled about my discovery without Quimby there, everything fell hollow. Willodeen, said Connor. This is important, please. Tell me. I motioned him over to the two willows where Quimby had spent the most time digging. Well, it was hard to know where to start. First, I had to figure out the right question to ask. Why are the hummingbirds only nesting here? What makes these two trees so special? Good question. Think about when we started seeing a fewer hummingbirds migrating to the village, Connor. Now that I was explaining my ideas, I felt my initial excitement returning. It was around the same time the village council decided to put a bounty on screechers, right? Connor sat on a rock, hand in chin, listening intently. That could easily be a coincidence, though. I held up an index finger. Maybe. But it was also a coincidence that hummingbirds are nesting here, where Quimby's been eating and nowhere else. I knelt next to one of the two deep holes Quimby had created. I wish I had my trowel, I said. Better yet, I wish I had Quimby. Reaching down past my elbow, I managed to grab a handful of snails. Look, I said. The farther down you dig, the more snails you find. That's why Quimby kept returning to the same holes. She found hundreds of snails here, Connor. Maybe more. And ate them all, he joked. I returned the snails and brushed my dirty hands off my coat. I started to wonder, what makes these two trees, only these two, attractive to hummingbirds? Well, could it be that because Quimby has eaten so many of the snails near their roots? Maybe having too many snails changes the trees in some important way. Too many? Connor frowned. I stood. Nature likes these things in balance, my pa taught me that. Maybe the screechers kept the snail population in check. Connor did not look convinced. So to test my idea, I said, I conducted an experiment, I guess you'd say. I got a bunch of different leaves, including samples of the blue willows, and the one down to the riverfront, and the new grove, and to be thorough, I added some other trees, too. I stopped long enough to cough. My throat was still burned from yesterday's smoke. Then I, borrowed one of Duzu's bubbles. A bubble? Why? I had just a hunch. Luck, I suppose. I figured there had to be something special with these two trees, something connected without having fewer snails around. It could have been, I don't know, but the way the leaves taste or the strength of the branches, but it could have been anything. I lifted my shoulders. But since I happened to have a bubble, I started there. Connor cocked his head. And the bubbles wouldn't stick, Connor. Not to any other blue willow leaves. Not to any other tree leaves. Not just the leaves from these two trees. I passed to catch my breath. I felt buzzy and hopeful, even confident. Connor stared up at the nest overhead. That has to be it, Willodeen. I still don't understand what the reason is, I added. Do the snails harm the roots? Does it affect the sap of the leaves? But if I'm right, we might fix things by luring screechers back into perchance. They could help keep the snails from getting out of control. Connor looked at his head. You're amazing. Do you realize that? I shrugged. I feel like Quimby showed me the answer to the puzzle, I said, sighing. And now she's gone. You found the answer, Willodeen, Connor replied with a sad smile. Quimby just provided the appetite. Chapter 37. When we returned to town, the sour smell of smoke hung over everything. The councilors had hastily scheduled a council meeting to discuss the fire damage and consider the future. Many people blamed the railroad for causing the fire, but dry conditions and dragon size clearly had played a part in it too. In any case, I knew what I had to do. Connor and I walked through the carousel. Like much of the village, it was covered in ash. I sat on the blue unicorn, and Connor leaned on my favorite gold-spotted pony. Do you think we'll ever see Quimby again? I asked, stifling another cough. Bertie and May had given foul-tasting elixir that morning to soothe my throat. Connor stroked Duzu, who was perched on his shoulder. Do you want an honest answer, Willodeen, or do you want me to lie? Lying would be nice, but tell me the truth. I doubt we'll ever see her again. I wiped away a tear. But whatever she was, wherever she is, it's a good thing that we had her here with us for a while. It never would have happened if you didn't give me that puzzler. Connor shook his head. We don't know that. Well, it's certainly quite the coincidence. People are already streaming into this hall in the council meeting. It took an entire village to show up, men and women, old and young. To my surprise, I saw Bertie and May slowly climbing the steps. I called out, and they both waved. Oh, school will be starting up again soon, Connor said. I know. It's not so bad, really. Connor wiped his ash on a gold pony's mane.
Of course, it'd be better if you were there, he added, avoiding my gaze. I really don't like crowds, I reminded him. Or, I grinned, you know, people. But you do like learning. True, I admitted. Bertie and May said it's up to me. They seem to think I'm too stubborn to argue with. You? Stubborn? Connor teased. My father says I don't have a choice. There's some sort of opposite of Bertie and May. He just wants what's best for you, I think. The worry on the face yesterday when he didn't know where you were. He loves you so much. I know, Connor reached up and scratched Deuce's ear. All that worrying seems the worst part of being an adult to me. Not to mention all those meetings, Connor grinned. I suppose it would be our turn soon enough. He pointed at the hall. A few stragglers were still arriving. You ready? I hopped off the unicorn. You know, I said, in surprise of myself, I think I am. Chapter 38. By the time Thaddeus Vineyard slammed down his gavel, the room was packed. Yesterday, he said, his voice solemn, we saw the best of ourselves working to fight a common enemy, caring for each other. His voice cracked. We fought other fires, faced our other problems, and what is time we worked together in a way I've never seen before. The crowd murmured and nodded. My grandmother, rest her soul, continued Thaddeus, had a saying. He paused to blow his nose. Thaddy, she would say. He called me Thaddy even when I was a grown man. Thaddy, with enough whispers you can make a roar. Yesterday our beloved village of perchance managed to roar. The mood was different from the last meeting I attended. Villagers stood in a long line, waiting for their chance to speak, but they were patient and kind to each other. I heard plenty of worry and fear. I saw some tears and even heard some laughter. But in the fresh experience of yet another fire seemed to have left the most people feeling grateful and humbled. Everything and anything was discussed. Clearing the land near the railroad track, creating a volunteer fire brigade, planting trees that resisted burning and couldn't require too much water. It wasn't just the fires. People talked about building a new school, about recruiting a doctor to live in the town, about building and growing and improving. And almost everything talked about the fair. What would it happen? Had anyone seen more than hummingbirds? Was there hope at all? I stood at the way back of the line, the last to speak and the youngest, and waited my turn. Then Thaddeus saw me. He groaned. Ah, he said. Will this be about the Screechers yet again? We have an awful lot to think about, as you can see, my dear. Perhaps another time. I blinked, flustered. This is only take a minute, I said. We're all weary, said Thaddeus as a baby wailed. And the little ones are restless. We have no time to talk about those smelly monsters of yours, Connor stood. Sir, he said loudly, you'll want to hear what Willodeen has to say. Trust me, we all need to hear it. Thaddeus narrowed his eyes. The chair doesn't recognize you, boy, he waved his gavel. Ready to adjourn, but Connor's father held up a warning hand. Thaddeus, he said, give Willodeen a chance. Miss Rossett nodded. Yes, she said. Goodness knows there's heard plenty from all of the adults. Thaddeus considered. After a moment, he slumped his chair. Fine, he said, dropping the gavel on the table. Speak your piece. And so I did. I told everyone I observed. I told them about the hidden grove, about the screecher who dined on peacock's nail. I did not tell them how she'd come into my life, and about the 11 hummingbird nests that Connor and I had discovered. When I mentioned the nest, the entire room burst into applause. People hugged and cheered and raised their fists. I looked over to Connor and we shared a smile. After the group calmed down, I explained as best I could how screechers and hummingbirds and blue willows all needed each other, even if it wasn't easy for us to see the understanding. I said they were a community same as we are. At this, some people stirred, murmured, shifted in seats, sighs. The same as us, someone demanded. I noticed a gray-templed man, neatly dressed, standing on my left. I'd seen him before. His name's James McLaughlin, owner of the nearby mill. Are you actually suggesting, child, that the foul beast deserves the same regard as a human being? He asked. He's right. We aren't animals, a woman yelled, and another murmured in agreement. I gulped. I knew that was in my heart, but turning that into words, coherent, grown-up words, perhaps that was more than I could manage. Behind me I heard others standing, more angry folks, no doubt. Was it how screechers felt, cornered, outnumbered? One touch of nature makes a whole world kin. I spun around. It was May, claiming with all of her theatrical flair. That's Shakespeare, he added, in case you were wondering. Bertie stood, too. Let Willodeen speak, she said. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. And be sure you listen. Never had she seemed taller and more invincible. The room fell silent, shocked, no doubt, by the audacity of these two old women. I was shaking head to toe. I took a breath. I found my voice. I said that we're all connected. People and plants and fish and birds and, yes, even screechers. I told everyone it wouldn't take time and work to undo what we've done. And that even if we brought screechers back, nothing would change overnight. But we probably wouldn't have much of the fair this year, even if for many years. And then I told them one last thing. I told them that nature knows more than we do, and she probably always will. Chapter 39. When the meeting ended, Connor and I led a group of villagers, including the counselors, to a hidden grove under the nest that had already been added in the brief absence. I felt odd, having all those people crowded into a space where Connor and I had spent so much time, but the joy in their faces made it all worthwhile. Several people openly wept at the sight of those miraculous nests and the gentle residents. Connor walked me back home. He didn't talk at all. We didn't need to. I just waved goodbye at him from the front door of the cottage, and he shouted, "Wait, Willodeen!" I returned to the gate. "What's wrong?" He pointed to his shoulder. "You almost forgot something." Doozy was curled on a tight ball, dozing away. He might as well have been cuddled on a pillow. Hunter ran his index finger along the hummingbird's back. Doozy opened one eye, then closed it. "He's snoring," I pointed out. Connor smiled. "He only snores when he feels safe," I said. "Wake up, Doozy," said Connor. "It's time to go home." "No." I took a step back and shook my head. I think I want you to take him, Connor. Let's face it. He pretty much prefers your company." My words hung in the air. I still haven't realized what I was going to say to them. Was I making a terrible mistake giving a gift that was almost as bad as accepting one? It made you obliged. It created a connection. But still, Connor had given me Quinby in a way, and Duzu adored Connor. It only seemed fair. I stroked Duzu. "Do you want to stay with Connor?" I asked. Duzu yawned, glancing at both with heavily riddled eyes. He replied with a firm coo. "Is that a yes or no, or a maybe?" I asked Connor. Actually, it was a yes. Of course it was. I made myself look Connor in the eyes. I saw gratitude there, but it didn't feel beholden. I didn't feel weighed down. I just felt glad. "You sure?" he asked. "I see you both plenty," I said, and suddenly I realized that might have actually be true. Chapter 40. That night I couldn't sleep. I missed the soothing snores of Duzu and Quinby. I closed my eyes. I saw fire raging, smoke without end, forest ever change. Opened my eyes, moon shoes, notebook ceiling. I closed my eyes again. I saw a hidden grove. I saw the adults listening to a child, to me. Eyes open, Quinby's box sat empty. Duzu's spot was cold and bare. Once more I closed my eyes. I saw Duzu sleep on Collar's pillow, dreaming of a world where he could still slip through the clouds. I smiled, and then I fell asleep. Part 5. Chapter 41. We had no fair that year. Everyone reluctantly agreed that allowing tourists to visit those precious nests in the hidden grove would be too dangerous. We didn't want to disturb the few hummingbirds who'd return. The council created a committee to decide the best way forward. They consisted of 4 adult members, including Miss Rossett, Mr. Burke, and 1 junior member, me. I barely said a word at the first committee meeting, but when I realized the adults actually wanted to hear my thoughts, I relaxed. Soon I began to realize how complicated every decision we made was going to be, how it would affect the villagers, the land, the river, birds and insects and animals. To begin with, we stopped the bounty on screechers. That much was easy. We considered paying villagers to remove the peacock snails that were harming our willows, but when the folks tried, they ended up damaging the tree roots. Screechers were simply much better at it. Some people suggested poisoning the snails, and the committee thought about it briefly, but Miss Rossett and I both agreed that we might end up killing the trees in process, but not to mention other creatures. When we learned about the nearby village that had been overrun with screechers, we created a new incentive for hunters, a payment for every screecher from the area, safely trapped and brought to the perchance, alive and well. It wasn't perfect, we risked disrupting screecher families, but it was a compromise we felt we could live with. And bringing the screechers would help keep the snail population under control. It helped that nature was resilient and sometimes surprisingly quick to recover. The screechers resettled easily, and by the next autumn the quarter of the riverside blew willows and the hummingbird nest with them. When tourists complained about the horrible beast stinking up our village, we learned to simply shrug and say, when screechers were invented, Mother Nature made them scented. That false fair, despite having fearing hummingbirds, was just like it had always been. Performers lined the streets, the inns were completely full, music played for days. I went a few times when I tried to keep my distance. For most part, I still hated noise and crowds. That certainly hadn't changed. Nevertheless, I managed to start attending school again, in the eager support of Miss Rossett and Connor. To be honest, I've missed the few days now and then. Sometimes I just need to wander the woods. Being close to nature gave my heart a chance to heal. I suppose I will be healed until the end of my days. Seems as how it goes when you lose someone you love. All things considered, school wasn't so bad. Miss Rossett obtained 2 books just for me, one about zoology and the study of animals, and the other about botany, the science of plants, and those always brought me back. Those books and Connor. The last day of the fair, I promised to help Connor close up his stand, and he had told hummingbears. He still sold hummingbears, but he started making other puzzlers too. They were wonderfully strange, hawks with fins, lions with wings, screechers and smiles. His father admitted he didn't understand what they were, or why Connor wanted to make them, but it didn't stand in Connor's way either. Some folks sneered when they saw Connor's puzzlers. When the first day of the fair, while Mr. Burke, Connor, and I were chanting, a woman walked past Connor's stand and loudly whispered, "What on earth is wrong with that boy?" To our shock, Mr. Burke responded, "What on earth is wrong with your imagination?" Connor and I had to kneel behind a stand to hide our laughter. Oh wow, pretty picture. That final eve, after I helped Connor pack up his things, we joined May and Bertie at the river walk. The sun was melting under Round Top Ridge. A puddle of pinks and reds and violets and bubble nests mirrored the spectacle. Mirrored the spectacle. Duzu, spitting on Connor's shoulders, cooed at the other hummingbirds. Was that a yes or no? Or maybe, Connor, May asked, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. I've never heard of that particular coo, said Connor. Maybe that's just between Duzu and them. We passed a juggler and a man playing a sweetly sad song in the mandolin, and he reached a new to its pool stand. Connor used the money he had made that day to buy each of us one of Baker Hummingbird-shaped pastries. You shouldn't waste your coins on us, Connor, said Bertie. Bird's right, May agreed, although she was already wiping berry filling from her chin. As a matter of fact, I sold 3 shawls today. It's good to... Weird. It's good to have a fair return, Bertie leaned back on her head and smiled at the nest above us. Wouldn't have happened without you, Willodeen. I grinned. Piffle, I said, and we all laughed. We sauntered along the rest of the river walk. Connor, I said, do you remember how you told me you were writing a story about Quimby? He nodded. Did you ever finish it? I'm getting close to the end, he said. I have feelings there's just one more part I need to add. I'd like to read it when you're ready. You will, I promise, he smiled, as soon as the puzzle out the rest. He walked with May and Bertie home, and with their permission and large lantern, Connor and I decided to walk up the hidden grove. Be careful, May warned, and don't stay too long. I promise, I told her, and I kissed her cheek. Screecher hunting, are you? Bertie asked. I was just looking for more questions, I replied. Bertie laughed. Trust me, Willodeen, you'll never run out of those. The Screechers come back to the place where she began. Some of the awkward animals, the ones with two-legged lurching and their odd smell, brought her back, and their net streaming, scrabbling but no pain. They put her in a dark box, and after a while they let her go into these woods. Such strange animals. Even now, she isn't sure whether to trust or fear them. She knows this place well. Already she's found her old feeding spot, the stream with its cold, sweet water, and the trees, their roots dotted with the snails that made her drool. It's always good to eat, but oh, those snails, is there anything better? She inhales the scents of the village, the river, and the forest, the blue willows, the faint smell of smoke from the fire, long past and still lingers, but more than anything, the air is full of life, messy and urgent, but thrilling. Night is coming, and she pleased with the abandoned den she found, cozy, warm, and protected on 3 sides. Why was she brought back to this place, with its ferns and snails and singing stream? What purpose is she supposed to serve? She knows only that she is glad to be here. Drifting off, the Screecher settles into her den, but something new is coming. She jerks awake in the fresh scents and sounds. She hears the grunts and sighs and songs and awkward animals, which sometimes not always means danger. She tests the air and knows those 2 scents. She remembers those sounds. But the mean, gentle hands and warm food and safe sleep. Another scent flows down the breeze. She recalls a furry winged animal under their eyes, with wide eyes ever watchful. She waits. The movement has stopped and the scent remained. They could be hiding, observing her from a safe distance. They make the night noise long ago and grumpily purr and deep within her chest. A moment later there is a delicate answering trill. After low sounds the moon makes its appearance. The forest floor shimmers and she sits up. She rests her head above the treetop starved blossoms. The sound she makes is wild and loud and free. It hurts, it's so loud. She screeches again. What a lovely sound it is. She's not sure why she needs to do it. Who knows why we do what we do? Where there are so many questions that'll never have answers, she is certain of one thing. She is the moment of this old wise earth, this earth that'll always be wiser than its inhabitants, and she is lucky indeed to be part of its magic.